Hello and welcome back to this damnful idealistic crusade. I am the motion picture analyst and continuing in my series of commentaries on the official James Bond film series. This will be a commentary track dealing with the 10th film in the series, which is, of course, 1977's The Spy Who Loved Me, directed by Lewis Gilbert and being the third of the Roger Moore era. And The Spy Who Loved Me became not only a massive commercial and critical success with critics and audiences alike in 1977, but it was a completely successful relaunching of the Bond franchise to the world at large after the disappointing returns and fanfare surrounding the previous film, The Man with the Golden Gun. And that relaunching became a real vindication for producer Cubby Broccoli, this being the first of the official films that he was producing as a solo producer, since Harry Saltzman had wound up selling his shares of the series in 1975 to United Artists, which then, of course, tied the series forever to that particular studio. And this, of course, long before UA was swallowed up into the MGM financial nightmare that is still ongoing to this day. But Bond was something that was not viewed as a really very viable property anymore, and people were really starting to become hesitant with the idea of continuing with the series. But Cubby Broccoli stuck to his guns and decided to essentially double down and make a massive gamble on going big on this next film and shooting the works, as it were, to really go for broke and make The Spy Who Loved Me, as the tagline aptly points out, the biggest, the best, and Bond and beyond. So, in many ways, The Spy Who Loved Me is a key turning point for the series. Not only is it the first solo film produced under Cubby Broccoli, but also, had it not been successful, there would have been no more series. It would have been dead and buried. And its success worldwide really helped to reestablish Bond as a well-known film phenomenon and set up the stage for the continued success of the series, but it also established a new sort of era within the production team, because not only did you have returning production team members, but you had people coming back and you had new people coming in, and it really establishes a new sort of tonality that I think follows into the 1980s films as well, seeing as this is when John Glenn comes back into the picture. Of course, he's doing the editing work on Spy and Moonraker, but would of course go on to direct all 5 of the 1980s James Bond films. So there is a renewed sort of vigor, a definite attempt to put every single last dollar and cent on the screen, which they did admirably. But it is a reworking of what had been tried out on the first 2 Roger Moore films, which you can see sort of as tentative steps in different directions to try and see where they can go with the Bond series and how to bring Bond into the 1970s and keep him relevant, but not to jettison or water down his character. And of course, Roger Moore is much more comfortable in the role on screen and always said that, this was the point at which he became comfortable with the role and the series and what he was expected to do. And you can sense that throughout, and that adds a wonderful quality to his performance. And because he himself is so comfortable in the lead role, it helps to elevate the entire film with him. Because, of course, an entire film is essentially on the shoulders of whoever is playing the lead character of Bond in that said film. And he always said that this was his favorite of his Bonds. And I think it was just from that comfort and the overall experience and the fact that everyone seemed to really be trying to give it their all this time around, because, chances were this was probably going to be the last time, if it was not, a massive success, which it was. And had it not really been for Star Wars, I think Spy obviously would have been one of the most talked about films of 77, which it still was, but practically everything got overshadowed by Star Wars in 1977, including The Spy Who Loved Me, which, probably, had it not been for Star Wars, Spy probably would have won some effects Oscars and, would have gotten a lot more acclaim. Still, it was one of the highest grossing films of the year and was a massive return on investment. So it made everyone happy in the production, and it made United Artists very, very happy. So it's really a remarkably important film for so many different reasons, but most of all because it was that going for broke and shooting the works on one more film, and if this didn't work, Bond was essentially done. So it's important mostly for that reason, and its success really meant the series could continue. And in a lot of ways, I think it became not stylistically, but I mean in terms of historical impact for the decade of the 1970s. It basically became the Goldfinger of the 1970s. It was the film that everybody went and saw and became re-enchanted with the world of Bond. It was the third of Roger Moore's films, just as Goldfinger was the third of Connery's films, and really reestablished Bond for the decade of the 70s, and then was quickly followed up by the even more financially successful film Moonraker, much as Thunderball was more successful than Goldfinger, and immediately followed Goldfinger. So I think it's interesting to note that in the 60s you had this amazing 1-2 punch of Goldfinger and Thunderball after the first two films had sort of built in an audience. And then in the 70s you actually have a semi-repeat of that, with the first two Roger Moore films leading into the 1-2 punch of global box office success on The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker. So there's a lot of interesting things to talk about. There's a lot of background. The scripting process for this film was a bit of a nightmare and a development hell. There were at least, there are several credited screenwriters, but there's a lot of uncredited work, and there were many different writers brought in over time, everybody from Anthony Burgess to John Landis, and then, of course, Kevin McClory popped up with claims on Spectre, so the villain had to be changed away from Spectre. So the process of The Spy Who Loved Me being developed, it's been documented in a few places and talked about a little bit here and there, but I think the whole process has never quite been fully, explained and detailed. There's a couple really interesting articles and a couple good books that delve into the subject, but I think if somebody were to write an entire book on the development process, I think that would be a book in and of itself, because while the film does retain certain elements from some of the script drafts from the different writers, which of course, when they wrote for Eon then owned said scripts, so they could, pull pieces out. This became another film where they had the title of a Fleming novel, but this being the one novel that Fleming himself, stipulated they could not use the story because it was viewed, the novel was not received very well on its release. It was Fleming's attempt to write from a female perspective and sort of do an experimental Bond novel. And outside of one or two things and it being a much lower key story, it's really quite underrated. It's got fantastic passages, and then it's got one or two things that are unfortunately questionable. But I don't think it's an embarrassment by any means. I think it's still a great read. But when Eon came around to do this, all they could use was the title, and so they kind of used that as a jumping off point. But they were already doing this by this point because, of course, You Only Live Twice had been essentially, jettisoning the vast majority of Fleming's novel, and the fans of the novel would see most of the film as unrecognizable. And ironically, of course, this is now pointed out all the time, but Spy ironically seems to use the same sort of plot structure as You Only Live Twice, except instead of it being space capsules being swallowed by nefarious third parties to instigate World War III, it is nuclear submarines on water. So, it's just aquatic instead of in space. And then, of course, in Moonraker, they go back to space with the same sort of plot structure. So apparently this was unintentional, but I don't know if at any point they realized this, but when you really start to look at it, it's like, you had all this trouble trying to get this script together, but you wound up like pilfering the main idea of You Only Live Twice. And ironically, Lewis Gilbert directed all three of these films. He directed 3 Bond films, so he's coming back after a 10 years away from the series. And really, I think this is where he really clicks in. And because You Only Live Twice, I think the spectacle really overwhelms Bond and the main story a bit, and that's not necessarily a criticism. That's just, I think, part of how that story, how that script turned out and how the production turned out. But I think on Spy, I think everybody, was in a much better place, and they were really trying. And I think Lewis Gilbert was able to apply what he learned on You Only Live Twice, and keep a greater focus on not just the story narrative, but Bond as the lead character in the central role, because everything is nicely focused throughout the film. So I hope to get into a lot of this stuff as we go along. Again, these are just off-the-cuff commentaries that I do. I don't have anything prepared. These are not professionally recorded by any means. It's just me talking into a microphone and trying to keep up with the film as best I can. So just imagine it as Roger Moore would say in his fantastic commentaries, which if you have not heard, please stop what you're doing after this and pull up his commentary tracks. But he would always say, imagine it's a one-sided conversation with a friend, a very one-sided conversation. So go ahead and grab whichever version of the film you wish, and we'll do a rough count-in. Again, I'm just going to kind of do a running track along with the film like I've done with my others, so it's a rough sync. It doesn't have to be exact, and of course, if you just want to listen to the audio without looking at the film, if you've seen the film before, which hopefully you would have if you're listening to this track, you can just listen along and imagine the film in your head. So go ahead and get a copy of whichever version you're looking at, whichever format, and go ahead and try and queue up. Since different versions have different logos, let's go ahead and cue to the right at the start of the gun barrel. It could be the black screen, or the dots can start to have already come in on the side. But I've found that seems to be a slightly better way to get everybody on the same page, because again, different versions have different logos. And on a technical note, I usually talk about on the early films, when I do these, I get people to select the original mono audio tracks, because the 5.1 remixes on those are really terrible, with a lot of added effects and changed placements and things, and I really can't stand them. They're terrible. But with Spy, it's actually the first film that has an official stereo, well, I shouldn't say stereo, it's a 4-track mix, so it's left, center, right surround, it's mono surround, which was upmixed into 5.1 on the last Laserdisc release and is carried over on all subsequent releases. This is actually the premiere audio mix that was used apparently at the London premiere, maybe New York as well, I'm not sure. There's not a lot of details about it because it wasn't a Dolby Stereo release. It was apparently done for the premiere engagement, and then the general release version was actually all mono. So most people saw this film in mono, and it would have been the last Bond film they saw in mono, because Moonraker was the first release in Dolby Stereo that had 70 millimeter and the premiere engagements, and then the standard 35 millimeter prints were in Dolby Stereo. So Spy is actually, technically, if you look at prints of it, almost all of them are, well, they're all mono that I've seen. So now the mono mix of Spy is the rare version, and you have to go all the way back to the original VHS and Beta and Pan and Scan Laserdisc releases to listen to a version of that. It just basically sounds like a single channel version of what we have, but it's really cool that this premiere stereo mix reappeared on the first Letterboxd Laserdisc release in the early 90s, and has stayed with us ever since. And trying to piece that together took me ages to figure out. So it's not talked about anywhere. And again, I believe that's what all of this is, but I could be wrong. That's just what my research seems to indicate, because again, none of this is officially said anywhere. But this one, you don't have to worry about selecting the original audio, because thankfully it's carried over. The only difference is on some versions, like on some of the DVDs, they replace the film version of the title song. It's slightly different, has a different piano intro. So sometimes they replace it with the soundtrack version. And I'll talk a little bit about the soundtrack re-recording in the remainder of the commentary. So that ends my sort of pre-ramble. It's not a preamble, it's me rambling. So pre-ramble about the film. So go ahead and go to your copy of the film that you're going to be viewing along with. Again, try and cue it to right at the start or just before. So I'm here in the black screen right just before the dots are going to crawl in. And go ahead, we will do a rough count in. So go ahead and in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and press play now. So we're here in the opening gun barrel with this wonderful, very striking arrangement by Marvin Hamlisch. This is the reshot scope gun barrel that Roger did expressly for Spy, because his first 2 films were, of course, spherical. So he does a beautiful turn in the tuxedo. His original gun barrel, he was not in the tuxedo. and this will be reused on all his subsequent films. They didn't reshoot a new one. So we open into the pre-title sequence, which is putting us right into the story. There was a beautiful shot of one of the model submarines that Derek Meddings was in charge of. His, of course, model work wizardry is all over this film. And it's a nice sedate opening here at first, but it gets us into the main plot of the film and gives us a nice setup of mystery. We get a nice view of the crew living in the sub, and I love the centerfolds that are taped up on the wall there. Just an interesting little bit of set decoration. They're, of course, at the chessboard smoking as our first glimpse of Jeremy Bulloch in a Bond film, who reappears later as Smithers in Q Branch. He, of course, is most famous for playing Boba Fett in Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Again, it's really cool how we get thrown into the plot, but we have this nice element of mystery because we're not shown everything. We're shown the HMS Ranger disappearing here, and it's slowly filled in with the reactions. And then the Russian sub, the Potemkin, disappears as well, but because we've seen the first one disappear, we don't have to see the Russian sub disappear as well. We can immediately cut to Moscow, and because we've seen the first sub disappear, you don't have to show it twice. Of course, anytime it's a sub and in a movie and they cut over to the emergency red lighting, it gets really dramatic. This beautiful cue by Hamlish is fantastic and really foreboding, particularly when the captain turns around and does the iconic moment. Oh my God. And then immediately hard cut back to the Admiralty. This, of course, is George Baker making his second Bond appearance. He was, of course, Sir Hilary Bray in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and also means he, of course, dubbed George Lazenby when he was posing as Bray at Peace Gloria. And again, we just from the response on Baker's face, and then we've lost one of our nuclear submarines. The weight of that makes up for you don't have to see the actual disappearance of the sub, because of course that's going to be held as the reveal for the Leparis actually opening when Bond is captured. And of course, here we are introduced for the first time to the new head of the KGB, the wonderful General Gogol, played by iconic for the Bond films and iconic for many different roles, played by Walter Gotell, who appeared in From Russia with Love as Spectre Agent Morenzi. Now, this is wonderful misdirection. Here we're shown Michael Billington, who was actually a potential Bond many different times. He was in a number of casting sessions as being a Bond replacement actor, but never got the job. Appears here as the Russian agent, Sergei Bonzov, who is the lover of Anya Amasova, but we think at first this is Agent XXX. He gets up, he says he has a mission in Austria, and the woman says, 5 more minutes. And then in the first of the audio end jokes, the KGB music box plays Lara's theme, which of course is from Dr. Zhivago. That's the first of a number of those musical in jokes from other films that of course appear in both Spy and Moonraker. But anyway, we see him get up, and until the last minute we don't realize that of course XXX is Anya. So the main Russian antagonist will be a woman for Bond. And of course, now that we've seen her lover's face, and he says he has to go to Austria, that sets up that he is being sent to kill Bond. And of course, Bond will be able to avoid the bullet in his back on skis at 40 miles an hour and use his ski pole gun to eliminate her lover, which sets up the dramatic turn of events later on in the film. One of the best double entendre lines there, tell him to pull out immediately. Now, this film was written by Christopher Wood with contributions from Richard Maybaum, whose original idea was rejected as being too political. But it seems Tom Mankiewicz did a lot of uncredited rewriting, particularly in the dialogue. And I can't help but think on certain one-liners like that and double entendres and some of Roger's dialogue, I can't help but feel the Mankiewicz. I know it's a terrible pun, Mankiewicz. But anyway, he's uncredited, so it's impossible to know exactly. Some people have said that he rewrote all the dialogue or certain scenes, but he definitely did have a hand in this film, which you can tell when you really look at it. But Christopher Wood does some remarkable things, and he wrote the tie-in novelization to the film, which is remarkable because it basically retells the entire film as if it was written by Fleming himself. It's really a Fleming pastiche, and probably, I think, the best ever written. It's a fantastic read. So if you ever wondered what this film would be like if it was a Fleming novel and much more serious and dark, you can read his novelization, which I'll mention more later on. So this, of course, is what everybody remembers, the ski chase portion of the pre-titles with this wonderful disco-y version of the Bond theme, which is retitled Bond 77 on the soundtrack re-recording. But it's wonderfully dramatic with beautiful footage shot by Willy Bogner coming back to the series after shooting the amazing ski footage for On Her Majesty's Secret Service. But, of course, this builds up to the iconic skiing off Mount Asgard with the Union Jack parachute, which was done by Rick Sylvester. And, you know, what really sells this sequence is all of this is done for real, and they almost missed getting the shot because not only were they up there for weeks, couldn't get the shot, and the weather cleared miraculously in just enough time for them to get the shot, but with all the helicopters and other cameras lined up, it was actually the last ledge cameraman sitting on the ledge who was able to get the only visible footage of the parachute. And that's what makes it, I think, even more impactful because the camera's right there. Now, this, of course, is very important to the story because this is where Bond winds up killing Anya's lover with this wonderful Q-branch gadget that is unexplained, but just a wonderful little notion, the fact that Bond can ski around, turn around backwards on skis and pull a pole out with a sort of bullet charge in it. And then we get a nice dramatic violin there. And then we go for the wide shots, and then this. And what sells it most is it's the ledge cameraman, and then the soundtrack goes completely dead quiet. And then you hear a slight wind coming in. And of course, when you look closely, you see the skis have come back over. Once he gets them off, they come very close to the parachute. So this is still, you know, so incredibly dangerous to do, particularly weather conditions. And you see there's the ski right there. And then the Union Jack opens. This, of course, brought houses down everywhere in 1977. Still does. It's one of those moments that you really have to see on a big screen. And then we get that little clip of Roger there in front of a process screen just to complete it. And then into the opening titles, you see Merce Bender actually pulls the Union Jack in. I love the image of the hands literally pulling the chute in. This, I think, is one of Binder's most inspired title sequences. He seemed to really get inspired and get his creative juices flowing on certain films, and then others he would go on particular directions. But I think this is one of his most intricately done and well-timed opening titles. And it's timed perfectly to Carly Simon's title song, which has become one of the great Bond themes, and of course is not titled "The Spy Who Loved Me," but the actual title does feature in the lyric, which is helpful. This is also the first time a Bond actor physically appears in the titles. We have not just Roger in stills, we have this wonderful custom footage shot, and I love how it transitions into the silhouettes where it actually is Roger again. So he's, you know, an active participant, and he, of course, would be utilized in more Binder titles. There's just a wonderful, there's a sensuality, there's a wistfulness in this title that fits how the emotion of the title song, which is what really makes it so special and iconic, I think. And I've always loved the image. You have the nude silhouettes twirling and doing gymnastics on all the gun barrels. I also love the spotlight here. I love the image of the coupling, which it prefigures Bond and Anya together and the deepening of their relationship over the typical Bond and Bond girl relationship. So you see the various new people coming in, of course, edited by John Glenn. This film was shot by Claude Renoir, nephew of the great film legend Jean Renoir and grandson of Pierre Renoir. I've always loved this moment here where Bond walks over to the female soldiers and just puts one hand on them and they all just collapse. It's just against the red smoke, and Roger just stands there. It really says so much. There's the screenplay credits. So Maibaum did get a screenplay credit, I believe, because I'm guessing, I've never been able to read the drafts, but that they used his very political script as like a basis to work from. And then Lewis Gilbert returns after a 10-year absence. And then as the last girl falls, the spotlight opens. It almost looks like an interrogation light, I've always felt, onto Gogol's office, which is beautifully designed by Ken Adam, who returns to the series after a nice gap, because he had not been on a Bond film since Time Reserved Forever. This would be his penultimate film. His last Bond film would be Moonraker 2 years later. And you can see immediately the return to scope photography, because the last two films had been spherical, and every set is beautifully put together. I've always loved this sense of space here in Gogol's office. You see just the chairs in the far background, and the rough-hewn, nice carved feeling of the walls with these columns. Really gives the set a character of its own. And this, of course, is what Ken Adam is known for, but I think he's just as effective in small sets like this. I love the delicacy of the performance here when Gogol tells Anya of her lover's death, and says it had not escaped our notice. So of course they'd been observed by Russian authorities. And Wood's novelization, he makes this scene really creepy. It has vibes of the almost seduction scene that Rosa Klebb has with Tatiana Romanova in From Russia with Love. And Anya's superior is much creepier, and she feels threatened for even having a physical relationship with anyone. So again, the novelization is much, much darker. So if I must recommend it to any fan of this film, but it's basically a Fleming pastiche of this film story. And so it's really interesting once you've read that to go back to the film you're used to and think about all the little extra pieces and dark scenes. I mean, the novelization even has a torture scene. Instead of Bond escaping at the pyramids, he gets captured by Anya's henchmen, and they hook him up to a car battery and start torturing him. It's like, this wasn't in the film. But anyway, it's fun going back to the film and then thinking about all those little bits of the book. So this is essentially taking the place of the M briefing scene, because this is at Naval HQ, where Bond and the audience is let into the disappearance of the submarines. Here we see Freddie Gray for the first time, and here we see Admiral Hargreaves, played by Robert Brown, who will, of course, take over as M for the unfortunately deceased Bernard Lee. There's a gap. You have For Your Eyes Only, where you see Bill Tanner, and then he takes over as M and Octopussy in 1983. So it's often wondered, there are fan theories that maybe his M is actually the promoted Admiral Hargreaves, which I think makes sense, but I don't think we're really meant to link the characters. just it's the best actor they could utilize at the time. So this is a wonderful little bit of drama when, of course, Bond unfurls the delivered, blueprints, and of course the line of the submarine trajectory matches completely. This sets up the whole business of someone selling Stromberg's submarine tracking system, and of course the reason why they're doing this is not just for money, but also because without that, both MI6 and the KGB would have no idea of how the submarines disappeared, and there would be no way to get to Stromberg, because of course no one would know that there was a submarine tracking system in the first place. And of course this is all done to make the British think it's the Russians, and the Russians think it's the British, which sets up the idea of playing the sides off against each other, which is what's going to set up the World War III scenario Stromberg has planned, which is what of course happened in You Only Live Twice with the Chinese and Spectre plan. Now, Desmond Llewellyn in his Q gets a wonderful little bit of technical dialogue, which, of course, he was notoriously terrible with and had to spend ages trying to get down pat. But he's explaining the technical way in a very, very simple, very brief term how the submarine tracking system could work, essentially trailing submarines by their wake as a rocket is traced by its tailfire. I love this little bit here with Freddie Gray where he and Bond are discussing while walking, and Bond has to salute everyone. This, of course, is the first time since You Only Live Twice you see Bond in his Royal Navy uniform, because, of course, he was a commander in the Royal Navy, which is something that a lot of people forget about or are just unaware of. So he is a Navy man. He did serve on submarines, so he has experience in this area. And so it's great to get little flashes of that, even if, it's not made very direct. So now we're introduced to Stromberg for the first time, played by the wonderful Kurt Jurgens, and he has this wonderful sort of... it's this laid back quality. He's of course one of the richest men in the world, but he's just doing this and still living the high life, and he does it on his own terms. His villainy, which I find a wonderful deliciousness in it, and of course Michelle Lonsdale as Drax and Moonraker will sort of take this to even greater heights. But it's interesting. This is the first time we've seen a Bond villain who not only does his villainy, but enjoys it while just living his day-to-day high life. So, of course, we have the two scientists who developed the tracking system. And, of course, one of them is called Mr. Markovitz, which apparently is an in-joke that was put there by Tom Mankiewicz to sort of tip his hat that he did some writing on here, because he sort of made a pun on his own name and named it, gave it to one of these hapless scientists who, of course, as we can see here, are not long for this world. But I love the reactions when they're told of the blackmailer, stealing some of the tracking system. And then Stromberg turns around, "Oh, my dear, it would be great if you would leave us." And we hear that absolutely chilling sound of the elevator, which cues us into, oh, I wonder who was the person who's the traitor. And if you look there in the close shot, you'll notice that Stromberg has webbed fingers. That's something you only see once or twice in the film. They don't mention it. It is mentioned a lot in the novelization, but that's supposed to be part of his character backstory and one of the many reasons why he's so water obsessed. He was water obsessed from a young age, and Wood gives him an amazing backstory in the novelization that has elements of not just Fleming's Red Grant, who was a psychopath, but also elements of Goldfinger, I think, as well. So it's a really fantastic backstory. I wish it was in the film, but I can't help but not think of that. It explains how Stromberg builds his fortune. It's really fantastic. And, of course, goes into the webbed fingers, which you only see in the film in some of the close-up shots. But I love how Stromberg is just... "My most profound thanks, gentlemen." Just after watching this horrible murder of the girl via shark. And of course he has a pet shark. And then the wonderful gag here of the elevator door opens again and then they pause. And all you hear is that chime. That if you ever get in an elevator in real life and you hear that chime, it's like, get the hell out of there. And I love how they turn around with that deadpan look on their face. It's like, are you going to kill us? And, of course, you have to wonder, since Stromberg's going to kill them in about 90 seconds anyway, why he doesn't just go ahead and get rid of them there. But I suppose it was to have the cover story of, the accident. And, of course, the funeral was at sea. This is another of the... apparently, these were all editing in-jokes, and they were liked so well they were kept. This, of course, is Mozart over the rising of Atlantis out of the water. This is, of course, Stromberg's HQ, and based off of several real-life installations, but the production realized they couldn't really use them, so Ken Adam went to town and designed this absolutely majestic piece of design. That it's so sad this isn't real. That it's this beautiful model work that just seems so massive. But I've always felt it's spider-like design with the circular openings and the glass pieces and are just majestic. Here we're introduced to Stromberg's henchmen. Of course, everybody forgets about Sandor, who, of course, is played by Milton Reed, who appeared in Dr. No as one of Dr. No's guards and is in, hundreds of classic British films. But everybody remembers Richard Kiel as Jaws, the most iconic henchman of the Roger Moore era, one of the most iconic henchmen in all of films. And that... his steel teeth is really the one thing they take from the Spy Who Loved Me Fleming original novel, besides the title. In the novel, there are two menacing villain characters, Horror and Slugsy, and one of them has metal teeth or steel-capped teeth. So I guess that idea sort of stuck in the writers' heads, and so that became, the impetus for Jaws having his iconic metal teeth. And here we see Stromberg just walk into his little aquarium room. I've always loved those body molded chairs he has, and of course he has Sony monitors long before everybody else had them. A little smirk, and there you see the webbed hand right there, and then just nonchalantly canceled transfer $20 million. I love that he at least informs the next of kin that they had a tragic accident. And it's that detachment that Stromberg has that makes him the most dangerous. It gives him this low-key, laid-back vibe that makes him, most people consider, oh, he's not that great of a villain. He doesn't have that much of an impact. But it was different at this time in 77. And of course, when his eventual goal is revealed and, he's not out for money or anything, that was really something different that had never happened before in a Bond film, that Bond is dealing with a completely insane person who doesn't even have a goal other than just trying to destroy humanity. And of course, here we see Bond essentially going Lawrence of Arabia, which will come full circle when an actual Lawrence of Arabia theme is used as the most famous film music edit in joke later on in the film. But it's great to see Bond use local garb and everything and really go, into another land. And of course, this is actually his MI6 contact. And I love here in the dialogue, they have the actual recognition codes, which we have not seen really since From Russia with Love. And once this is given, then Hossein stands up and then immediately breaks into a smile. And we have this back and forth, and we state that they're actually old friends from their school days. And we get this sort of recognition of Bond's past, and that he is an actual human man outside of being the iconic James Bond Superman character. And I love this back and forth that they have knowledge of each other, and and that's Bond says, "Never had any question what you'd be doing, Hossein." Oh, you do persist in being so businesslike. It's this wonderful back and forth that makes this scene so much more interesting and impactful, because otherwise it's just getting from point A to point B and Bond meeting with his contact to go to his next contact, which of course will be Fekesh. You just look at Roger throughout this film, and he has this assurance, and it's there in Live and Let Die and The Man with the Golden Gun, but it's that comfort that he talked about, and it's the third film role. It gets talked about a lot, but it is really something when you're playing this sort of role. I think for any actor or actress, in something, but there's nothing else that's this big or this iconic. I mean, there's literally no equivalent. So it's an enormous pressure, and I think the level of comfort is really something that is a factor that has to be factored in, and you feel Roger's assurance just multiply, and he's just walking through Egypt here. And he literally owns the world. There's no shakiness. There's every move, every poise he has is just so beautifully assured. And again, I think it helps to just elevate everything around him. Here's a shot of Sandor watching Bond go to Fekesh's apartment. This is a scene that doesn't get talked about very much, but if you look at it closely, it is a bit darker in the novelization, but as pretty much the whole thing is, because the novelization is tonally a Fleming pastiche. But Spy is actually quite grounded. It's quite dark. It's really hitting a perfect blend of the globe-trotting elements, the lighter touch of Goldfinger, but with that From Russia with Love espionage charge without getting too far into the spectacle of You Only Live Twice. So really, you have From Russia with Love, you have some Live and Let Die, you have some Man with the Golden Gun, you have, a bit of Goldfinger, and you have the sort of structure and large world-shattering scale of You Only Live Twice, all percolating or stewing in the pot that becomes The Spy Who Loved Me. So it's cool to notice these elements and how they're being twisted around and reinvented into something new and something fresh and vibrant. And I think this is what audiences picked up on, even if they weren't saying it, because everybody latched onto this. If you look at Roger here, Bond is really having, he's carrying out interrogation, and we're led to believe this is going to be a From Russia with Love style tryst, where he's getting Fekesh's location out of the poor, unfortunate secretary. Of course, in the novelization, it's spelled out further that this is actually his mistress he left his family for, and again, it's a lot darker, but of course, this is to be cut short. by Sandor, and you have to wonder, did she know Sandor was already there, or she just turned around and sees a gun and it's like, oh. And of course, Bond has to rather coldly leave her lifeless body and go after the assailant. Again, look at how beautifully Roger pulls this off. Again, we cut to the close-up at just the right moment. And again, he's doing what, Connery would have done in From Russia with Love, trying to get information out of this woman, but doing it completely differently, but with still that nice hard edge. I always love how he just has to literally toss her dead body aside. And this takes us into the rooftop fight, which culminates in one of the best deaths in the Bond series and an iconic one-liner. I've also always loved Roger's tailoring here. It sort of has it's not quite the safari look, but I love the brown and how it fits the Egyptian locale. So this is a wonderful little fight. Again, Milton Reed had been a stuntman and been in so many classic British films, a lot of Hammer films, and also was in Dr. No as well. And he also appears in the 1967 Casino Royale. This is a nice little fight. It has some really nice little gritty moments, like the side chops and the little snap sound when he's got Bond in a bear hug. And then in a second here, you have the signature Roger Moore fight move coming up when Bond grabs something overhead and does the kick. That is, I think, the signature Roger Moore Bond fight move, probably the signature Bond fight move, along with Connery's judo shoulder throw. And here is Sandor's death. He grabs onto the tie, and of course, it's just it's so beautiful. And Bond is able to finally find out where Fekish is, knocks the tie. And that's what we say to all fans who say Roger Moore's Bond was too soft. So now we immediately cut to the pyramid sequence. Again, you see a really nice pacing throughout this film. I think John Glenn establishes and maintains a wonderful rhythm. There's some really nice bits of humor in the transitional edits, but everything keeps moving at a perfect pace, and we hit a wonderful 2-hour, 5-minute runtime. Again, not too long, not too short, but beautifully paced. So here we see Anya with Fekish for the first time, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Michael G. Wilson, I think, might make a cameo here in the background somewhere. He started making cameos in the films. He's in pretty much all the films somewhere. And I love how Bond is observing this conversation. He doesn't know who either of them is at this point. He knows what Fekish looks like. And so he's observing Fekish talking to this woman, and obviously that, it's a rival party interested in the same thing. And we see Jaws off in the distance, and we see Fekish's reaction, which sells the danger of Jaws far before we see what Jaws actually does to people when he meets them. Of course, you have to wonder why Fekish just gets up and leaves a crowd. If he fears for his life, why does he leave the KGB agent, and the crowd of people? Why does he go off into the dark? This was probably a bad idea. And this is wonderfully dramatic. Every time, as part of the light show, we get the lighting up Jaws standing in the dark until he finally sees Fekish lit up by the stage lighting. And then Bond is essentially a third party in someone else's game. He has no idea what's going on and actually sees Fekish's murder. Now, this shot here, if you look at Roger there on the right, he may look a little weird. It's actually because they were missing a shot, and that's actually a production still of Roger they cut out and put there and then had to superimpose it on the frame. It's a beautiful fix that, again, you wouldn't know unless you heard them talk about it in the commentary, which they do, and the making of documentaries. Now, this is the wonderful setup of Jaws being the almost demonic-like assassin who keeps coming back and very vampire-like will kill his victims by a bite to the neck, which ostensibly, I guess the idea is he's either severing their jugular vein or biting through their neck and snapping their whole spinal column and brainstem and everything. again, the novelization has a really nice backstory for Jaws. Actually gives him a name and everything, and then there's an extra fun little bit that explains him not talking. That apparently, in the operation to give him the metal teeth, they had to cut his vocal cords, so he's now mute. Which, of course, that gets undone in Moonraker because he suddenly talks. But you definitely have a menace here with Jaws in this scene. And Marvin Hamlish really scores this beautifully. This whole sequence, not just this part, which again, the green lighting almost makes me feel like a Hammer film. Jack Asher with his photography loved to use green lighting, especially in The Mummy. And of course, this being a Egyptian tomb, I immediately think of that with the green lighting. But it's just a wonderful little stylistic flourish. I love how Bond is just an onlooker, and then comes up, pulls the Walther, and then Jaws just stops there. And had this wonderful little first encounter, which is cut short by the darkness, and Jaws escapes almost like a specter-like figure, just disappears into thin air. And this dramatic cue as Bond goes in, and we see Anya onlooking, which of course leads her to think that Bond killed Fekesh. Again, beautiful usage of green lighting here. This scene has always stuck with me. When I watched this film as a kid, I always thought it was so striking how Bond is examining a dead corpse inside an Egyptian tomb, and then here the music cue when he uses his lighter to read the Max Kalba at the Majaba Club. He's following the trail of clues. But the cue here of the voices is very spectral, and again, like of the dead. So I've always found that such a striking moment. Then it's capped here by Bond meeting Anya for the first time, and their first sort of repartee. Where's Fekesh with the pharaohs? No, he was dead when I found him. And then she does this little nod, and he's attacked. If you look at the guy in the gray suit, that's actually the legendary stunt coordinator, Bob Simmons. So it's one of the times he actually physically appears. You look very closely, you can see his face. I've always loved it. It's one of the times you can actually see good old Bob there. And then it's timed perfectly with the music. And then Roger just straightens his tie, walks away. Hope you enjoyed the show. Good night. It's just one of those exquisite little moments. Of course, Bond would do something that amazingly dramatic as if he had his own, orchestra behind him. Then we cut immediately to the Majaba Club. We see Roger in an immaculate tuxedo. This whole sequence, it's obviously Bond just following the trail, encountering Triple X again at the nightclub, but it's such a beautifully designed set. The cue Hamlish makes for this, just everything. It has a whole atmosphere and a vibe that has a sense of mystery, a sense of fun, and again, Roger's assurance just really carries the whole thing. And this is the wonderful unmasking scene where Bond and Anya go back and forth because, of course, they've hit each other's files, in their respective inventory, and they sort of give the blow-by-blow account, and they know each other's game and that each other is representing their government for the submarine tracking system. And it's done here beautifully by ordering each other's preferred drink. Of course, the actor playing the barman would later show up in Octopussy as Salruddin. And this is the wonderful bit of continuity where Anya, goes through Bond's license to kill and then mentions his penchant for women and his marriage, and then gets cut off where, you're sensitive, Mr. Bond, because she's, of course, mentioned Tracy, who, of course, was killed at the end of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And Roger does that so well. He immediately becomes directly engaged and then goes right back into the, tragically, I have a previous engagement. Now, the last line there is very important. You have to pay attention to it because, of course, he says, let's not say goodbye. Let's say au revoir. I have the oddest feeling we'll be meeting again sometime. And that comes back into play because at the during the climax, when Stromberg takes Anya off the Leparis right before the giant battle, and then Bond will have to save her on Atlantis, you'll notice Bond actually says au revoir, meaning that he will come back for her. They will see each other again. So it's sort of a chivalrous moment, but it flashes all the way back to this scene here. It's a little line, sort of a throwaway. You don't notice it for the longest time, but it's just a little thing I really love that they went to that length of showing there being a deeper relationship between Bond and his leading lady in this film than we had seen in some time, and it builds over time, which is really rewarding. Here we see the world's unlikeliest phone repairman. Anya reappears, and this really is where the sort of battle of the sexes mentality ramps up in the film. So Bond and Anya, throughout the entirety of the story, have this wonderful sort of back and forth banter, which belies their deepening relationship. But and also it goes cold, of course, when she finds out that Bond is the man who killed the love of her life. Now, if you notice there on the shot of the microfilm and the shot of Bond, you see two usages of a zoom lens. There's a little bit of usage of zooms in Bond, but you see not really all that many in the early films. And so it's interesting to note their usage here, and they're always done for dramatic reasons, no crash zooms or anything. I've always loved the pullback shots here in the club. A second later, when Bond will get up to look for Calva and find his corpse, I think is really wonderfully dramatic, that reverse tracking shot there. I love the camera peering in through the actual holes, almost looks like bars through the actual doors. Here, Jaws strikes again, and it's built up wonderfully, intercutting with the music and the stage musicians. And we get this wonderful, slow building bass sound that comes up, which really makes it a shame that the film score has never actually been officially released on disc anywhere. What we got was a wonderful re-recording for the soundtrack LP, but it's a re-recording, I think, done in Los Angeles. So the film's actual score and the complete score has never been released. It's one of two Bond films, the other being Dr. No, without the actual score being released. There's the wonderful bit of Bond getting up, reverse tracking shot, the music builds up in the background, and it culminates when he opens the door and Calva's body falls out. Of course, with the phone still in his hand. I love the nice little bit of blood on the white tuxedo jacket, again, sort of suggesting the vampiric quality of how Jaws kills people. And then Bond sees the out of order sign and leaves it on him. It's a wonderful flourish. Again, the humor in Spy is perfectly dialed in. It never goes into the goofy realm that Moonraker does in certain spots, and it always maintains this real grounding, which I think really assists the entire story in being involving and engaging. We never go into complete fantasy land, which is really, Bond should never do that completely. You can have elements of fantasy, sure, elements of science fiction, but you can't go too far. You have to have that element of the spy story. It has to have that two-fistedness to it, that grit. And here we have this wonderful banter back and forth, which of course is right out of a 1930s, 1940s film of classic Hollywood, or a Hitchcock film, or a Hepburn and Tracy film. But of course, it's two secret agents in the back of a van, and the fun gag is Jaws is hearing every word they say. So there's a nice bit of reveal there. Again, the film has a nice element of mystery and is full of these nice little reveals, but also the way that the characters are played. They're going for this submarine microfilm, and Triple X has never failed in a mission before, and she wants that microfilm, and she's going to get it. And then Bond simply realizes, unless I get it first, with a beautiful smile. And then she falls asleep on Bond, and her head goes over, and he just slightly adjusts to let her rest comfortably. They hit a bump, and then she immediately sees what's going on, and Bond has to pretend as if nothing happened. It's just, it's a wonderful bit of it's not even exactly humor. And then of course the next time they're seen, they're back to back, both with stiff lips again. The false front is up. So it's just wonderful when you see their humanity starting to peek through, and it's those little flashes that help to set the foundation for their attraction to one another. And of course, they're ostensibly of equal footing, and they're their agency's best operatives. But at first they're constantly going back and forth. She nudges him, but Bond takes the time to grab the ignition key. So that sets up later he's already got a plan to get out, because of course he's the one with the keys to the van. And then in a nice reverse, Bond then takes the lead after cutting her off, since she just did it to him. I must mention really quick, I've always thought that Anya's dress here, not only does it look great in the Mojave Club sequence, it looks fantastic in the day amidst the Egyptian pyramid exteriors. I think it's one of the most iconic, pieces of costuming for any of the Bond leading ladies. The sort of, midnight blue with the sort of sparkly silver trim across the top. And now Jaws has disappeared again, as if he has the powers of all the dead, or he's a vampire. Again, there's always this nice return to a mysterious vibe throughout the film that helps very much, because Bond and Anya are trying to solve a mystery of what happened to the missing nuclear submarines. So it fits perfectly. And in just a second here, we get one of John Glenn's patented little jump scares when Bond and Enya back up to one another. This is where those first appear and would become a real mainstay in the films he directed, particularly in Birds coming out of nowhere at inopportune moments, and For Your Eyes Only, and Octopussy, and but you see one or two of them here. The big one being when Jaws is aboard the train and just bursts out of the closet. Of course, it's funny, how the heck did Jaws get all the way up there in that short amount of time? But it's interesting to see that Jaws here does have a bit of a brain. He's not a cartoon character like he becomes in Moonraker, so it helps sell him as a much more menacing character, because here he sneaks up on them, gets the drop on them from above. We see the shadow of him coming through. Anya sees it before Bond, and in warning him does ostensibly save his life, which again, why would Anya do that if she wants the microfilm herself? She obviously does kind of care about Bond just a little bit, even in that sort of gut reaction thing. So again, it's that humanity starting to poke through the job, as it were. And I love how Roger just looks over, and Bond is already realizing, how shoddy this little area is, and how, okay, if we could get him to hit this, then the whole thing would collapse. So we see Bond putting this together, because of course his gun's been knocked away. She's got the only gun. Of course, a gun that size probably wouldn't hurt Jaws all that much. But of course, Bond is using his intelligence here, which is what he always should do. Get a nice build up, and then the collapse. And of course, the one-liner here, because they were shooting in Egypt, they couldn't use the Egyptian builder's line, so they had to sneak it in, and then, I believe they looped it in later as well, because the, Egyptian representatives didn't want that criticism. And we get the shot of Jaws' hand coming up. Again, it did become a gag of Jaws always surviving, but in Spy, it's always, he could just maybe survive. You could just picture it. Always loved the bit here where Roger does the keys with that sort of, he just holds his hand up. She realizes the keys aren't there. He drops them out for a second, half smiles, immediately takes them away, and then just slowly gets in, and she's stupidly thrown the microfilm up there. You're just too late. And they sit there just enough time for Jaws to start literally becoming a one-man wrecking crew on this poor van. And Bond just starts taking the single key off the ring just to stretch it out. Jaws literally is ripping this van apart with his bare hands, and Bond is completely nonplussed because he's letting it be Anya's show. Again, Roger does this so beautifully. And again, it's not him being jokey or being light. It's him as Bond literally trying to take the Mickey out of Triple X, which is so much fun because of this back and forth dynamic they've set up. And she does show her capability. She is throwing the van around. and then gets him back with the reference to the iconic martini order when she throws Jaws up against the wall. And for a second, Bond doesn't even have a comeback. Of course, Jaws is still going at it. You would think they could hire him at a salvage yard and, save a lot of money on their car destroying costs. And then here is where they added the note of humor, where he takes the big rock and he goes to throw it, and then ostensibly drops it on his foot. It's just a tiny note, and they would take that one little bit of humor and run with it in Moonraker. Which again, he does have some good scenes in Moonraker, but it loses all the sense of menace that he has here in Spy. And Bond is, chiding, and while thanking Anya for saving his life, he does chide her, and she just responds, "We all make mistakes." Again, it's this wonderful back and forth, and here is the Lawrence of Arabia music coming in with this just destroyed van, going across the desert before breaking down. It's just a wonderful image that you just wouldn't think of on your own. And then just trails off, and this van has totally had it, and now they're stranded in the middle of the desert. And it's cut perfectly to Roger's little wink and smile there. And then when she says the cylinder head gasket is gone, Bond just says, "Oh." And then immediately turns to walk. And there's just something about this where you have these two in formal evening wear. Bond takes off his tuxedo jacket, drapes it over one shoulder, and they walk off into the desert with the main theme of Lawrence of Arabia. It's absolutely perfect. So the fact that this was originally an in-joke, the reason it stayed, there's nothing you could do better than this. And of course, seeing this film as a kid, it was really my introduction to this piece of music, which, changed my life in a lot of ways, because then I was led to actually seeing Lawrence of Arabia and realizing, that it was probably the greatest film ever made. And then I love how it trails off into this wonderful piece that Hamlisch created, and it's another one of those cues that I adore, and it makes me so sad there's no complete soundtrack release. This is the wonderful little scene on the boat, where we're a little overdressed, but he's agreed to take us to Cairo. So this is where Bond actually examines the microfilm with this wonderful little never-before-seen gadget from Q, but it's hidden inside his cigarette case and using his lighter, which just is a wonderful bit of gadgetry that it's hidden in all this. And Bond can actually look at the microfilm and then realize that, it was devoid of the proper technical data. So he's, again, following the trail, but he's doing it surreptitiously because he's done this. And even though XXX steals it from him later on, he's already gone over it when, she has to take it all the way back to HQ for, seemingly her KGB superiors to, examine it and find out what Bond already found out on the boat. And then he puts his coat back on, goes over to her, because he's already examined the microfilm and he knows it's practically worthless. This is where she goes into all the stuff about the Siberian survival course she went on, which is used in their repertoire later on the in the train sequence. And leads to what we think will be a love scene. And we think, oh, well, Bond's got the drop on her, greatest lover in the world. Well, I guess XXX is done for. But again, in a wonderful reveal that's built up to a nice twist on that scenario. Like Jaws hearing their conversation in the van earlier, of course, XXX gets the drop on Bond with her trick cigarette strapped to her thigh. So it's this wonderful, slightly playing around with the audience expectation, but instead of playing with the audience's head, it's playing a bit with the traditional Bond formula while reestablishing it. So that's what I think the script does so beautifully, and the direction and the performances. That's what I think this film really does. It reestablishes Bond, but it's it builds on what came before, enriches it, and finds a way to make it play in the late 1970s to feel fresh again and feel modern. So here again, here's the trick cigarette with the knockout gas, which of course Bond should have been prepared for, and he's made a fatal mistake. He could have those could have easily been poisoned cigarettes, but thankfully they're just knockout cigarettes. So it's fun to see Bond make a mistake, because from this point we think she's gotten away with the microfilm, and now Bond has to go back empty-handed to MI6. Of course, we don't know at this time that he's already examined it and the microfilm is useless, because he has no technical information. So he checks his pocket and he realizes, I'm a chump. I've just been, I've been used. I got the microfilm back and she knocked me out. Great. You can see it on his face. And this is sold further by this wonderful scene where he walks off the boat and he's going through all the local populace in full evening wear, in the full tuxedo. And they're all staring at him and they all start laughing a bit, because here's this perfectly dressed Englishman in a tuxedo in the middle of nowhere, just walking around. And now he's back at the pyramids, and you have to wonder, well, what is he doing here? This wonderful Hamlish Q. It's a nice little scene with a great deal of mystery to it, and the just astonishing locale. That's right there. All you have to do is go there, and you're immediately in another world. But of course, this is setting up that Bond is actually going to, I guess, a sort of auxiliary MI6 headquarters in Cairo, which is inside the pyramids. So I guess maybe that's on the MI6 plan of build your HQ inside landmarks or things where you don't have to pay rent, like building it inside the Queen Elizabeth and the Map of the Golden Gun. So now we have the more traditional M office scene. We have the banter with Moneypenny. So we think he's going to go through Egyptian leather door and run into M. He goes through the door. Another reveal. He sees Gogol. So now something is really up. And he doesn't go immediately straight out. He walks around, because he and the audience can't believe it at this point. Moneypenny's outside, but Gogol's inside. And there's Triple X. What's going on? Then M comes out. There's been a change in plan. It's like, oh, you think? Really? Why is the KGB here? This, of course, is where, they pool their resources, as it were. I love the smile that Gogol has on his face. And then Roger comes up as Bond saying, I'm just enough to know what sort of brand of cigarette she smokes. A new era of Anglo-Soviet cooperation. This was also done, I think, to once again when Eon made these films, it was Cubby Broccoli especially, who tried to keep them from getting too political, and especially didn't want to offend any Russian or Soviet interests. So I think this was a very healthy way of involving the Russian forces into the Bond films directly, without making them the villains and making them, equal players. And of course, they go back after this film to having the usual Cold War tensions. But if you look throughout the rest of the series, same thing in Octopussy. The Russians are not the villains. It is a renegade, rogue Russian general in General Orlov. And of course, that plot starts to get uncovered by Gogol himself in the film. So it's always these interesting ways of involving the Russians as an outside force without making them the villain. Now, here's a wonderful little in-bit for fans there. If you listen, Gogol says, "No, I insist after you, Miles," making a reference to M's real name from the Fleming novels being Miles Messervy, or Admiral Sir Miles Messervy. There we see a quick demonstration of the cement guns that are on the back of the Lotus Esprit. This, of course, being the wonderful Q branch in Egypt division. And, of course, I have to always wonder that wonderful bit with the magnetic tea tray earlier when Q says, "I want that ready for Ahmed's tea party." Okay, where is that tea party? Why do you need a decapitating magnetized tray? And where's that movie? So now they're going over the microfilm where Q is running the projector, and of course it makes it seem sort of like Bond in the classroom with the slightly annoying overbearing teacher. This is where they're going to follow the trail to Stromberg because Bond happens to notice the tiny thing that it was resting on, and they're able to barely pick out the Stromberg Laboratory Marine Research Laboratory logo. But it's not done off the cuff. It's built up, and we see different perspectives able to piece it together, and it's by power of deduction, which is really nice to see. And it's done in a way that Bond and Anya keep topping each other. That not only continues this battle of the sexist mentality that we're seeing between their characters, but also now, since they're representing their various governments on a political level, you can see M is impressed by Bond's knowledge, and then Anya says, "No, actually, it's in Sardinia." And then Gogol gets to have the last laugh. It's like it's a nice bit of back and forth from a political standpoint there, which is mirrored by their bosses being there. And then you have this wonderful exchange of close-ups between Bond and Anya. Bond starts to break into a smile. She looks down, and then you see a smile start to break out. And as soon as it does, we cut to the train. That's a wonderful little moment that they allow to play out just enough to show Anya softening towards Bond, finally. And that's furthered here because, of course, by the end of the train sequence, they finally do actually get together after another life and death struggle with Jaws. So, but it's setting up this relationship. That's what the film does really well, and I think Lewis Gilbert really pays very close attention to, because it's so important. Of course, it's in the title, The Spy Who Loved Me, so of course it's important, but it's something that often gets kind of short shrift in, everything else that happens in a Bond film, because when you read the Fleming novels, his heroines are always so deeply characterized and drawn to a great degree. So you really buy into the Bond and lady relationship, because in the novels, Bond isn't just bedding every female in sight like most people think he does in the films. The films kind of do that somewhat, but it definitely helps with the drama and the story when there is that great focus on the leading lady character. And of course, that does, with this train scene, it makes you go all the way back and think of From Russia with Love again. So that's something Spy doesn't often get singled out for having, but I think there's this really strong context of being a grounded real-world story and being still a great globe-trotting adventure with, a villain and a giant base that's secret, and he has his own private army and all that stuff, which is the fantastic spectacle, but it's still nice and grounded. So I think, while it does share the Only Live Twice sort of plot structure, I think they really learned their lesson on what happened there. And this is a wonderful little scene where it's starting to look like, again, a scene from a classic comedy romance from Hollywood, where the two would-be lovers don't want to admit their feelings for one another, and they go in adjoining rooms, and they keep each thinking the other's going to come in to the other's room. Bond adjusts the champagne a little bit, but Anya goes to the closet, and here we have the patented John Glenn jump scare of the film, where Jaws is suddenly there, and we suddenly hear the roar of the train whistle come in, and suddenly Bond can't hear over the train, but he hears her scream, and that's what cues him to go in. So the nice little bit of potential romance has been interrupted by a nice fight scene, which we didn't expect. It's another nice reversal. And then we get this wonderful fight with Jaws where you can really see, how clearly overmatched Bond is. When Richard Keel's hand grabs Roger, particularly, you could see his hand is like almost bigger than Roger's face. So it's like, it becomes that question, not just how does Bond get out of this, how can he? That's what makes the fight scenes really work. So it's getting into a bit of the From Russia with Love territory, because, it's how can Bond get out of this? How can he defeat him? Again, look, you see Richard Keel's hand literally as big as Roger's face. You really see the desperation on Bond's face here. You see how big his eyes get, and those teeth come in, and he gets so close. He tries putting his hand in, he tries everything. And then at the last instant tries for the lamp, and then ingeniously breaks the lamp off to electrocute him, and is able to just barely get contact. And I love they actually added the shock effect optically there. And again, here comes the signature Roger move, grasping overhead, kicking Jaws out. And once again, what should have killed somebody, of course, only makes Jaws more determined to come back. And then in the wonderful topper of the scene, it's not a one-liner, Jaws simply brushes off his coat, straightens his tie with a look of "I'll get you next time." It's just, it's that right note, that right note to cap off the scene of danger that immediately preceded it. Because now we go into this wonderful scene where the romance finally comes into play between Bond and Anya. The nice effect of the broken train glass providing a nice wind machine effect to their hair. Bond's shirt has been torn open. He's been roughed up. He's bleeding a little bit. And Bond makes a joke on her survival course mentality. Still enjoy traveling by train. Just one of the best lines in the film. Roger does it so well. And it's nice that Bond is bleeding. He's a little roughed up. That fight meant something. And, when Anya says, you saved my life, he really did. And it's a nice reversal of her sort of saving Bond's life before. So now they're once again equal, and that near-death situation has fully awakened their humanity again. And so now she's going to lie down and take a look at the wound. I've always loved how this is shot. This sequence, it adds by getting the camera in close, and then when Roger just puts his hands up and pulls her closer to him, it's just the right level of sensuality being increased and showing them finally, embracing one another physically, and then that's all you need, and then we immediately cut to this nice little bit of them essentially as a couple arriving in Sardinia via carriage. So that's a traditional image for couples, I think. So it's a nice sort of visual metaphor, which I think is very well done. And here we have the appearance of unquestionably the second most iconic car of the Bond series, and one of my life's obsessions, the Lotus Esprit, the original S1 model, which was, of course, transformed into the masterpiece of the imagination, Wet Nelly car submersible for the film. And of course, the submersible actually did work. It was a wet submersible, so it was driven by guys in scuba gear to give the bubbles, but it actually did work. They did have several shells from Lotus that did different things, like the one car could do the wheels going in, and one car could do the louvers and things like that. But the actual sub car they built, actually did work, which is amazing. And it's really great that we get the breaking of the Goldfinger rule. Q doesn't get to demonstrate the car. And then Bond just roars off, and we see just the look of pain. We feel Q's pain when he just does the, oh. So, of course, this sets up the surprise when Bond drives Nelly off into the water. And, of course, we have no idea it's a submarine. So it's one of the few times we break away from the established rule of creating suspense by showing the audience the gadgets, by showing the ejector seat on the DB5 and Goldfinger. I think that was done to play up the surprise factor. And, of course, it does work here because it's meant to be a surprise. The hotel clerk is, of course, played by Valerie Leon, who would reappear in Never Say Never Again in another hotel with a Connery's Bond coming back in 1983 in the unofficial film. And then the little fun bit about, they're supposedly, Bond and Anya are posing as the married couple of Mr. and Mrs. Robert Sterling. But, of course, they've been booked with, 2 bedrooms and a suite, I always love Bond's line about Moneypenny being a little over-efficient. Of course, this is the real hotel location, and that the film utilized. Now we're introduced to Caroline Munro's iconic Naomi, the wonderful villainess of the Stromberg organization. And she just literally walks into the film and has such a wonderful, knowing quality, almost reminiscent of Fiona Volpe in Thunderball. And it's a shame that she gets killed off so early in the film, because you can imagine all of the wonderful back and forth banter that she and Bond could have, particularly if, maybe Bond got tied up and she could have a scene like Helga Brandt on the Ning Po and You Only Live Twice, where she has a weapon against Bond or something. And then the line here is another one I have to wonder if maybe that was a Mankiewicz line, What a handsome craft, such lovely lines. There's a number of little lines like that. I always wonder. I would love to find out for sure what is specifically Tom Mankiewicz and what is Christopher Wood, but unfortunately we just don't know. Now, if you look closely there, you may miss it at first, but Stromberg is actually reflected there in the glass of Atlantis watching out. Because, of course, Bond, despite having a disguise, is posing and everyone is suspicious. But that shot there, even though it's a process shot, when they go to the big shot of Atlantis from the boat's perspective, from Bond's view, and you get the little movement of the water, and then when they go in, we get these large looming overhead shots. It adds this massive sense of menace and really sells Atlantis as being enormous. And of course, we see an entire speedboat just go into a little part of the leg. So it's beautifully done because, of course, Atlantis itself was a scale model, but it really helps to sell the you're going into the domain of the villain. Of course, we see the webbed hand there again. Again, the only time you see the webbed hands are moments like that. And that's why Naomi says here, Mr. Stromberg does not like to shake hands because, of course, he has webbed fingers. And that's why he does his hands up with his fingers together, sort of in a angry manner when Bond sticks his hand up. And, of course, because Bond has been warned, he does this on purpose. It's a nice sort of jousting with the villain moment that Bond frequently does. The whole, as it's termed in Die Another Day, the provoke and confront method. And it's another nice little touch. You don't notice it first. But Bond specifically, even though he's been warned, he still sticks his hands out just to throw Stromberg off edge. And then the wonderful bit here, we see Bond actually notice the arm and part of the tattered dress of the unfortunate secretary who was eaten by the shark. I see Stromberg in another one of his, I don't even know what his outfits are called. They're not quite the Blofeld German Mao things, but again, see there, Bond tries to shake his hand anyway, and Stromberg does his hands up like that, and you can see the webbed fingers again. And we get the traditional Bond villain back and forth, but under the veneer of keeping the cover. And Bond is barely able to keep it up because Stromberg starts to test him. And, of course, thankfully, Bond is the walking encyclopedia on most objects and, of course, knows the scientific name for that variety of species and can just rattle it off. And so for a second, you can see Stromberg like, oh, you know your subject, Mr. Sterling. Handsome but deadly. So it's again, it's like the recognition code. So obviously Bond boned up a bit on Marine Biology 101 during the train trip after his nighttime tryst with Anya. I mean, just look at this set and you know Ken Adam is back. I mean, you say The Spy Who Loved Me and you immediately think of the oval windows and oval glass, all of the stainless steel, of course the gigantic Lepar set. You think of Atlantis, but I mean it has Ken Adam all over it, and he basically gets to shoot the works and got the budget to do so. I have to admit, when you look at the shots of the shark there, inside Stromberg's little, I guess this is his aquarium room. I don't know what you call it. But if you look at the shots of the shark there, I've always felt it looks quite a bit like the shark we see in the end of Live and Let Die. So I've always wondered if maybe they just had extra footage. So you see it there behind Stromberg again. I don't know if it's the Live and Let Die shark or if it's the shark they have for this film, but it just never looked like the circular shark pool in the shark room to me. So I don't know, maybe if that's the Live and Let Die shark making a cameo. Of course, Stromberg there has this little scale model of his underwater city, which, of course, is apparently his ultimate end goal. He wants to destroy humanity, cause them to destroy each other in World War III, and then encourage everyone to live under the sea. Now, of course, we cut back to the shark when Bond gets on the elevator and we hear the chime of death again. We see the shark. We see its mouth open. We hear the chime again. The doors close. Then we see Bond inside the elevator, and we're sitting there wondering, oh God, is the floor going to drop out? Is he gonna get eaten by the shark? And of course, it opens. He's being allowed to leave. And of course, this has all been a test. And of course, Stromberg will talk to Jaws. Jaws will positively ID them, and Stromberg will allow them to get ashore and then be eliminated, always with that element of cover, so that way when people die, it's not on Stromberg property. So it's that plausible deniability, which I really love. Almost has a sort of corporate aspect to it, which I find endearing in a strange way. Stromberg does kill people, but he does it with class, and he makes sure that he can't be blamed, so it's done off property. It always seems to be eating for some reason, so I don't know what that's supposed to mean exactly. And the Lotus roars out of the Hotel de Volpe, and we get the wonderful shots of the Lotus moving. They had quite a bit of trouble doing all of the chase scenes with the Esprit because it was, the early production car. It did have some mechanical issues, but they couldn't get convincing enough footage, so they actually had a Lotus representative there, and he saw what was going on, and he's like, well, you guys aren't driving it hard enough. I know how to drive it. So he took over the driving. And so I've always thought it was really amazing how fast the Esprit is moving in a lot of the chase shots. So if you look really closely, especially the helicopter shots that when they're really getting up to speed, the Lotus just really is like attacking the road. So I think it has this really intensive sense of movement. Now this is wonderful here, where Anya notices the motorcycle and says that motorcycle, and then Bond completes it by saying, has been following us for the last mile. So again, Bond is always the detective intelligence man, and his reflexes are always sharp, and actually are shown to be a bit sharper than Anya's even. And even with that in mind, he's still caught here by the tractor trailer full of mattresses. A nice dramatic music cue. And of course, we don't know what the sidecar is at first, but of course, it's some gigantic sort of road rocket bomb. Of course, I don't even know how you would develop this method of death, but it's fantastic. And again, Bond is just barely able to get around and not hit the oncoming traffic. Get this beautiful explosion. And of course, it's full of mattresses, which causes the rider to get covered in feathers and sets up the great line. All those feathers, and he still can't fly. And pulling off those one-liners is incredibly difficult to do. And of course, if at first you don't succeed, now we have the traditional car chase with the henchmen firing guns, Jaws taking the lead. And again, look at the sense of movement that gets established here. These cars are really going at good speed. And I've always loved the fact that Jaws empties his first gun and then grabs the gun out of the other guy in the back. And then the other guy here in the back seat with the revolver is actually stuntman George Leach, who is a longtime Bond veteran. And then here are the cement guns, that's a wonderful gag to eliminate pursuing cars. Spray a quick-drying cement over their windshield once they get close enough. That causes the car to go off the cliff. And then this wonderful shot of it crashing completely through the roof of this poor guy's little house. And, now he's completely having a heart attack. And then you hear this little bit of noise, and here comes Jaws walking out. He must have a really expensive bill at dry cleaners for all his dirty suits. And then the look that Jaws gives the poor guy, and the poor guy's mouth just hangs open. And then part 3, the helicopter comes out of nowhere. And then for me, the best line of this sequence, when Bond just says, "Ever get the feeling someone doesn't like you?" Music immediately starts back with an extra charge. And the machine gun bullet hits are just all over the ground. The car is really moving here. Like it's flying down the road. And then majestically, the helicopter comes up alongside. I mean, I don't know how long that took to choreograph that. And probably the most iconic moment of Roger's entire Bond career, Naomi giving the wink and Roger giving the little side nod. And then she gives the little farewell salute because she's going to kill them. It's just, of course, it would be Naomi behind the controls of the helicopter, that appears to eliminate the Lotus. It's just exactly what would happen in a Bond film. Then a nice little bit of, chasing here where Bond spins the Lotus around, tries to throw the helicopter off track by going in a complete circle, trying to throw her off, and then she just backs off. So we know that the helicopter is coming back somewhere. We just don't know where. And then we get another nice little surprise here where it suddenly is in front of the car, then spins around. So obviously, Naomi is playing for keeps. So Bond is really going to have to do something drastic because he doesn't have many options here. And this, of course, is where he's backed onto the dock. He drives off. Can you swim? What sells us further is that Anya herself is freaked out because Bond is just driven off the edge of the dock. And then you see him flicking switches, and the entire audience is like, no way. No, it can't be. Oh, my God. And you see the wheels go in, and you see the louvers come down. You see the periscope come up. You see the fins come out, and it's just like, no way. It's so well done that it's absolutely believable. And of course, again, the actual Nelly itself was a real submersible. They really built the thing. It worked. So again, obviously, the reason why there are louvers over the windows, it was two guys in scuba gear inside because it was a wet submersible and not a dry one. So, of course, there have been amphibious cars in the years since, but this is still, just one of the most iconic images from the entire Bond series. And I love that after Bond destroys the helicopter, dispatches Naomi, then he says, alone at last, and we get this wonderful interlude with this gorgeous music where they just travel through the beatific waters. Of course, this is supposed to be Sardinia, but I believe was shot in the Caribbean. We get all of this marine life with this gorgeous music, and then we're just once again going to Atlantis. We see Atlantis topside, and we're able to then get a geographic sense of where Bond is taking the Lotus. And there it is. That's what we've come to look at. So now we get the real reconnaissance. This is what Bond was probably intending to do in the first place, was drive the Esprit underwater, but of course had to deal with the various goon squads first. And I like they're able to just literally travel up, and there's literally a porthole to look through, and you see some sort of control room area. You see the first glimpse of the orange-suited Stromberg army. So it's like, okay, well, he's up to something. So it cements the idea, along with the various kill squads, that they're on to something somehow. But, of course, they don't know what exactly yet, so there's still a mystery to solve. And, of course, they're not out of the woods yet because now we have an entire underwater battle with the various Stromberg scuba armies. Again, Hamlisch's score and a lot of the action cues does have a certain disco-y vibe, which a lot of people like to point at now because it is very much of the 1970s, but it always works beautifully, and his usage of the classic James Bond theme throughout helps to sell it, and I think musically has a nice energy, and it goes perfectly with the film, so I don't think the score is dated at all, and it's done so well that the dramatic moments, the action cues, everything works cohesively. And again, this isn't just a simple way out for Bond. He has to struggle, and the missiles go off and actually cause the leaks to start in Nelly. So there is an element of danger because once they're able to just barely disable the sub, which of course is actually the same submersible that appears in License to Kill as the Milton Crest Shark Hunter 2 sub that we see at the Crest Laboratories. We see it Rescue Sanchez. It's still the same yellow color almost, but it's fun to see that make a cameo. And I've always loved the fact that all of these switches are hidden as, actual car switches. So the limpet mine is dropped by hitting the hazard switch. And we're wondering, okay, how does Anya know this? And we get the wonderful gag. How do you know about that? I stole the blueprints of this car 2 years ago. And Bond just nods. And of course, the humor is immediately undercut because more leaks start. And, do you think we can make it? So again, there's an element of danger. The Lotus then hits the sea floor and then has to come back up. So can they get out before the car sinks? So the music gets a little dramatic. And then we get this sequence, which is the Lotus coming out of the water. Bond is a little desperate to try and get it out before they sink. But this scene is just so wonderfully, intricately put together. It has the right elements of humor. We have the first glimpse of everyone's favorite, the drinker who can't believe what he's seeing and stares at his bottle, who would reappear in several more films. But then Marvin Hamlisch caps it off by a perfect guitar rendering of the James Bond theme leading the music. And all the onlookers stare on in wonder, and Bond drops a fish out. That was an added gag they improvised, and some have claimed maybe it's a bit too much, but I just think it's absolutely delicious. It's one of those little bits that, again, that whole that whole driving up on the beach is another way of capping off the whole action sequence of the Lotus. So it's there for a reason instead of the traditional one-liner. Get one more message from Valerie Leon's very voluptuous hotel clerk. And of course, it's the news about the trace on the Leparis. And of course, we find very strangely it's not put into port anywhere whatsoever, which of course no ship would do that. So again, following the clues, what they've uncovered over the course of this investigation together, actively working as a team, not quite at first, but, by this point they're a team. They're able to then realize something's, not, no pun intended, something's fishy. And so they're going to now follow it up with a close investigation by jumping into the USS Wayne later on. And we have a nice sense of intimacy between Bond and Anya here because they actually have a relationship. And of course, Anya is trying to get over the death of Sergei earlier on. And the reveal of Bond being the man who killed her lover is revealed right here, and it's done so simply because, she remarks at the lighter Bond lights her cigarette with, and Bond says, "I bought it in Berggarten." It's very natural, and she starts to put two and two together and pulls his photo out, "This is the man I love. Did you kill him?" Now, Lewis Gilbert pointed this scene out expressly as being the key scene for Roger's performance in the film and where he really showed off his dramatic talents, because this is the dramatic high point of the film in terms of character, because this is where Bond and Anya's relationship suddenly ends. She goes cold and says she's going to kill him by the end of the film. So everything that's come up to this point is now completely being destroyed because Anya has now found the man responsible for her lover's death. And, Bond correctly explains, in our business, Anya, people get killed. I always love the line, when you're on skis at 40 miles an hour with someone trying to put a bullet in your back, there's not always enough time to remember a face. And then Roger simply says, I did kill him. He sells it with such conviction. And when she says, "I will kill you," Bond just simply takes it in, nods slightly, and then she goes off, closes the door, and Bond is left alone with his own thoughts and emotions. So I think Lewis Gilbert was very correct to realize how important that scene was. And then that sets up this new dynamic of Bond once again trying to provoke that humanity out of her, and except now, instead of her being just the cold KGB agent, now she's literally cold because the whole time she's like, "Okay, yeah, I'm going to kill you." The only reason you're still alive is because we have this mission to take care of. So, of course, they're now on the USS Wayne, and it is captained by the wonderful Shane Rimmer. This is the biggest of the roles he had in a Bond film. He previously appeared in You Only Live Twice as a radio operator, and in Diamonds Are Forever as one of Willard White's control techs at his laboratories. This is his biggest role in a Bond film, and it's wonderful seeing him work with Roger and everybody. And this is the fun gag the script has about Anya being the only female aboard a sub full of shall we say rather cooped up guys on a submarine. And it's just a simple joke, but you see just the slit through the curtains, and you see the reaction of the sailor. "What's the matter, sailor? Never seen a major take a shower before?" And then the slight smile. But the best part is once he goes through the door, he closes the door, and you see his eye, and he's catching that one last glimpse because he can't believe what he's seeing. So now we see the Loparis for the first time in full view. Now, this is, of course, actually is a full miniature that was under the supervision of Derek Meddings. And again, you wouldn't know it's a miniature. It is astonishing. It's amazing when you see the production stills of the guys literally standing on top of the Loparis and just realizing they built, and it's a massive, it's not, saying it's a miniature, you think, oh, it's like 6 inches long or a foot long. No, this thing was like 40 feet long. It's massive, but it's amazing when you see grown men standing on it, having to do placement of things on the top deck and things like that. And then, of course, they literally blow it to smithereens. So, I mean, it's just amazing work. And then the interior of the subs themselves is extraordinarily realistic and feels real. So that helps to sell all the model work. And of course, the models themselves are intricately put together. Here we see Anya loading her gun, and then we know that as Bond says, which one has my name on it. And then Anya sells it by, I've never failed on a mission, any mission. And we think we're having a nice little scene, and then immediately things start to shake. We hear the noise again, and we think immediately back to the pre-titles. So again, in another nice little twist reveal, we suddenly see the red lights come on, and it's like, uh-oh, we're going to see the same thing happen as what happened to the sub we saw in the pre-titles. Now the music gets really dramatic with this cue. We see the Loparis coming up. And then we see the bow doors start to come open. And now the audience is able to start piecing together just how exactly these submarines have disappeared and what happened in the pre-titles. Now the captain has his own personal, oh my God, moment. And cutting to the wide shot, it's amazing how well that works because, again, these are still models. So the fact that they could cut to a wide shot, the models were so large, they could still be convincing and give you the right geography of the ship having to come around behind and then causing the sub to stop dead. So then it could literally be swallowed up. And, of course, again, you can't help but think of You Only Live Twice here with the intruder missile that goes up into space, opens up, and swallows the space capsules. Now, when we go inside the Loparis, you notice it's nice and dark, and we're just seeing the bare elements, as the sub goes in, and we see the 2 missing submarines that Bond and Anya have been searching for. So they found what they were looking for, but now they're in over their heads, and how do they get out of it? And the music gets really dramatic as we see the doors close. We hear the loud finality of their closing. Silence, and then the lights kick on. The alarms kick on. All the lights spill out over the stainless steel ceilings. And we see the enormity of the Loparis supertanker set. The first usage of the 007 stage, which was built for this set, the largest sound stage in the world at the time. And we see the full scope of Ken Adams' genius on display. This is unquestionably one of the greatest sets ever built for any film, rivaling Adams' own work on You Only Live Twice with the volcano crater set. But of course, the idea here being that because they built the entire soundstage, they then wouldn't have to tear down the stage because they unfortunately had to tear down the volcano because what other film is going to be able to use a volcano crater rocket base as a set? So that, of course, has meant that the 007 stage, although it's burned several times, it has been rebuilt. It is still used to this day and has been used for many other iconic sets for other films. But, I mean, this is just a masterpiece of set design. Saying that is just an understatement. I mean, you just there's so much to take in that it almost detracts from everything going on. So now we see how Stromberg gets the crews out. He attaches a limpet mine, and if they don't comply within time, he will gas all of them with cyanide. So he's going to kill all of them anyway. So, you think, oh, well, they'll just stay in there because I have to protect the nuclear missiles. Well, no, he's going to kill all of them anyway. So, they have to hurry up and get out. Otherwise, they're going to be gassed. As Stromberg says, "Hurry, Commander, I am not renowned for my patience." Which it's just a really funny bit, It's like they're getting out, but if they're not fast enough, he's just going to gas them anyway. You have to wonder why he doesn't go ahead and kill them and why he keeps all of them prisoners. But, little incongruities like that you're not supposed to question all the time. So Bond decides he has to hide Anya. I don't exactly know why. I guess he just doesn't want to get spotted by Stromberg, so that way, hopefully they can mix him with the other personnel and try and effect an escape. But of course, this is not to be because of the security camera overhead. And the idea of a facility having, full video surveillance was, pretty, it existed, but, it definitely was not commonplace in 1977. So that was a fun technological bit that, of course, you see it in the film. You're like, of course, Stromberg would have video surveillance so he could monitor everything on the Leparas. And all the scenes here, this is really what sells. The whole film is beautifully shot by Claude Renoir, but this is the area where it really cries out for scope because this set is so massive and so unlike anything that had come before, right down to the working monorails and everything going around that you needed. If you didn't shoot scope, you would need to go large format 70 millimeter. So, I understand completely. This was part of the going for broke, increasing the budget, also paying for scope. And unfortunately, this temporary attempted escape is not effective. And the video surveillance comes into play because Stromberg can just say, bring him here. And I love how they crammed all the other guards in the elevator with them. You see guards everywhere, so there's no way to get out of this. So we're going into the traditional Bond and villain discussion. Villain plot has been revealed, and, we're going to find out exactly what Stromberg wants. And, Stromberg will talk about he's going to instigate World War III. Bond and Anya are trying to figure out why. They're trying to figure out how they can stop this. And then Bond asks, all right, how much do you want? And then Stromberg gets that curious look on his face. How much? What do you mean? Whatever do you mean, Mr. Bond? The price for not firing those missiles, And then we get the reveal, the ultimate trick reveal of the film, that Stromberg has no goal other than destroying humanity. There is no extortion. There is no Spectre-like plot. He literally wants to destroy the world because he is insane. And this is the first time that Bond had ever come up against the lead villain who was literally insane. That's the big difference. That's the great reveal of the film. And so many people just, I don't think, really latched onto that. I know they did originally in 1977 because you see it here. We hadn't gotten this before. Stromberg is completely off his rocker. And that's the dramatic change. That's the dramatic bit of the climax. Bond can't get to this guy. He has to stop this because this guy is completely insane, and his plan doesn't even make all that much sense because he is insane. He just has the means to act on it with his vast resources and apparently his entire private army. He's constructed this and carried it out. And we see a repeat of this in Moonraker with Drax, but it is done a bit differently. Although he has that same veneer of civility and sophistication and fine living. But it's the same sort of idea, Bond going up against the megalomaniac, but, the ones who are completely unhinged and cannot thus be reached. Again, framing is so key in any miniature work, but mixing in perfectly with the full-size stage is just a really difficult thing to achieve, and they do it so beautifully. And that cold detachment of Stromberg really makes these scenes all the more chilling because this is a type of villain we haven't exactly seen before in a Bond film. And now we know he's completely insane. He's completely gone. So he not only means what he says, but he will not stop. He has gone to all this length, and Bond literally and Anya have to do something because there's no way to stop this as far as they know at this time. So there's an interesting element of helplessness in a way. And again, that's magnified here because we see them in the middle of all the forces, in the middle of the room. Everyone else is in orange. And here's the moment I referenced before. Stromberg says, "The lady comes with me." Stromberg has the great line, "Farewell, Mr. Bond." That word, I must admit, has a welcome ring of permanency about it. And Bond tells Anya au revoir. Again, wonderful character moment. And you see she still has that coldness on her face, but she's being led away. And Bond is still trying to appeal to her, So that is what I think helps her character, turn back in terms of not ultimately killing him. But again, it's setting up that notion so early on and then Bond calling back to that. That's great. Of course, if you look at the shot there, they use a shot of Anya inside the boat once it's already on the water to use there with the model. Now, this is the great bit where Bond grabs the actual gun used to fire into the sub, and he uses it to escape, and then he fires it at the guards, and it passes through both of them, which is amazing. And I know Spielberg is a giant Bond fan, so I know that's where he got the idea and lifted it for Last Crusade, where Indy has the, I think it's a Walther P-38, and he fires it through 4 Nazis on top of the tank in the tank chase. That's, if you ever wonder where that came from, it's there. Again, even the side corridors, I mean, look at this. You see this set, and just even this outside the prison cells, and the prison cells have these vault-like steel doors, and the actual, if you look at the seats of the monorails, they're covered in leather, and you see the circular lights, the lights coming from within the walls. I mean, it's a masterpiece of design. I mean, that people don't do this anymore. Now Bond is effecting the rescue, and all the crews are going to release each other. And of course, there's a convenient armory that they're going to be able to break into. And this will lead into the great battle of the film, which is the first time we've really had a large-scale battle between two forces since You Only Live Twice. But here it's a bit more, not necessarily a bit more believable, but definitely much more grounded, because it's the captive submarine crews who have had arms training, of course, going up against a private army who is similarly armed. But again, furthering the You Only Live Twice scenario, you have the control room that's sealed off with the steel shutters and things. But unlike that film, it is actually impregnable until Bond can rig up the missile detonator to actually blow it open. I love how dramatic Hamlisch's cue is here when everybody starts to arm up and they just grab grenades and everything by the dozen, and then they charge into here. And interestingly, at this point, all the music drops out, so the whole battle is actually unscored, and you just have one of the most classic examples of two forces going up against each other, nothing but small arms fire and grenades going off everywhere. Then you hear the warning alarms going off, and they just go for broke. I mean, this is full-on Boyzone adventure. This is the type of action you just don't see anymore. And what makes this all the more special, it's really guys running around as if it was one gigantic game of cops and robbers, and they're just hurling grenades and firing machine guns. It really appeals to the heart in a way that you don't see anymore. And it's interesting, all the little bits of business they come up with, tossing the grenade to blow the Jeep up later on when the captain gets killed and Bond has to dump the grenade really quick, Bond running out of ammo and having to be handed another clip, all those little things to keep the battle fresh instead of it just going on and on forever, like a lot of people accuse the underwater battle in Thunderball of doing. And of course, all of this, really stylistically, it's all going back to the Gypsy Camp fight in From Russia with Love. That was really the first Bond big spectacle battle fight. And similarly, like you see in From Russia with Love and Thunderball when they did it again, on Her Majesty's Secret Service as well, they all follow the same idea. We see Bond as the willing participant, but he's like the outside figure. He finds the key personnel. He dumps the grenade there, you see. He, of course, comes up with the plan to blow up everything, and he comes back. We've taken both sides of the lower dock. So he is the outside point man fighting intelligently and managing to survive. And of course, again, like I said, he will be the one who develops the plan to blow open the control room. this becomes right here the ill-fated attempt to actually get in the first time, but it does give them the all-important information that, all the guards inside have gun ports and port for a flamethrower as well, because, they machine gunned everybody, but yeah, let's burn them too. It wasn't enough to just kill them. We can just burn them as well. And then dramatically, one of the guys tries even a grenade, but even that won't work. Again, there's another usage of a zoom very dramatically. And here we get another great transitional edit where Bond admits he's going to find a nuclear missile. Wait, cut. Beautiful transitional edit. There's so many of those, wonderfully done, expertly timed. So I think John Glenn deserves a lot of credit for how effective this film is, because he establishes a rhythm right there in the pre-title sequence, maintains it, and really keeps that energy going while having to do the multiple cutaways. So now we cut to Atlantis. We see Anya captured, tied up. And of course, she's not in a bikini, but one automatically thinks of Scaramanga's line in Man with the Golden Gun. I like a woman in a bikini, no concealed weapons. And I love that the captain of the Leparis has to report what's happened, but he undersells it. He's like, there's been an escape by some of the prisoners, but we have it under control. We're impregnable here in the control room. It's everything's fine, I swear. And of course, the entire ship's on fire, and all they have left are their control room crew and everybody else. The whole ship has been taken over, but he's like, everything's fine. Now, this is a wonderfully tense scene where Bond has to disarm the detonator and get it past the impulse conductor circuit, which, of course, all this has to get explained to us, but essentially, Bond is operating on information he has an idea about. And, of course, wonderfully, he gets asked, James, you know what you're doing? It has to be a first time for everything. Everybody gets wonderfully nervous. And it's really done beautifully. It's very nerve-wracking because, we get, as soon as he disconnects, we get that wonderful humming noise, and it gets loose. And now we get the explanation about the impulse conductor circuit ring that you can't touch the detonator to or it goes off. And there's several points when Bond is pulling it out where it gets close and they play it up in the soundtrack. You'll notice the actual humming gets more intensive, and there are times where it almost seems to make contact. That really makes you, dig your nails into the armrests of the theater seat, So wonderfully done, wonderfully put together. All the music's dropped out. We get these really intensive close-ups, and we stick to that. And only when it fully comes out are we able to all take a collective breather. And this is what all bomb disposal or bomb defusal scenes should do, and all the best ones do. But this is a wonderful little scene that's inside, the great battle on the Leparis. And again, Bond showing his ingenuity that he can manage to not only deactivate but disarm a nuclear warhead. It's like, all in a day's work. Oh yeah, I read about this in a manual once, because they have us read everything in MI6, and I don't like being at my desk, but I read it one day, and I remembered something about a number 6 detonator you could get out if you twisted it counterclockwise. And also, the element of mystery is maintained because we see Bond is up to something, but we don't know exactly what it is. So we're kept guessing a little bit. We see him climb up. We know he's going to use the detonator somehow, but we have to see how he's able to get up there undetected, and this is developed over time. So again, it's still playing off that element of mystery, because we don't exactly know what Bond is up to. And so we have to figure out how exactly is he going to get this detonator on there, and how is he going to get it to explode with the timer and get away and everything. And then to heighten it a little bit more, one of the gunmen spots him, lets off a few shots. So they now know that somebody's up there, but again, they have no idea what he's up to. But now the camera's been moved over because they're trying to then see who's out there, and Bond is able to hitch a ride. You see him glance at the Seiko really quick, of course, this being the first film where you see Bond wearing a Seiko watch, but of course that doesn't become a gadget until the next film. Outside of the ticker tape watch in the pre-title, I should say. Now, this is the one time outside of the pre-title, the gun barrel, and the bit on the wet bike where Marvin Hamlish's version of the James Bond theme plays. And it's beautifully low key, and it doesn't go into the fanfare until the very last moment. But it's always saddens me. It cuts off. There's the wonderful edit where Bond pulls the plug on the camera and the fanfare cuts out. And because the soundtrack's never been officially released, the film's soundtrack itself, we've never heard this version in full. So it's a wonderful little bit of drama where the fanfare just cuts out and it's like, oh no, like we were hearing the Bond theme finally. So it's nice, but it's also like I'm still waiting. I still want to hear the full Marvin Hamlish version of the James Bond theme. So now we're able to grasp that Bond is going to use the track of the camera, but now it's been cut off. So now his plan isn't going to work. The timer's ticking down, and he's literally stuck hanging there. So it's really great because he has nowhere to drop without killing himself. Timer's ticking down further, and they don't cheat it too badly. They don't cut to a million places and cut back to the timer, and it's got 22 seconds still on it. So he drops and bang on time. And I love how Roger's literally right there. Bond is there for the explosion, which is taking out most of the Stromberg crew inside because Bond just literally detonated a nuclear detonator right in front of the door. And then I love how Bond yells out the ceasefire as well, because he's, again, taking the lead in this charge. And, of course, the captain has stayed alive long enough to tell them exactly how long they have. You can't do anything. You have 4 minutes. And then immediately Shane Ripper says, but James, we only have 3 minutes. It's like, didn't you just hear him? He said 4 minutes. Maybe he meant like 3 minutes and 55 seconds or something. And then it seems almost too simplistic for words, but it does make a good bit of sense that the idea of they don't have enough time to stop them, but maybe they can break the tracking system, like crack the code, which Bond literally finds the handy-dandy code book here to do some early computing, and is able to get their coordinate information, which of course, and a very Ken Adam flourish is built into the globe, much like the map of Willard White's holdings is built into the floor of his penthouse in Diamonds Are Forever. But of course, the idea being that Bond and company will be able to give the target as the other submarine and cause them to destroy each other. So it makes sense. It eliminates them. And of course, the rest of the world will always wonder, why were there strange nuclear accidents in the ocean on this random day in the 1970s? It's a military mystery, we swear. The world didn't realize how close it came to extinction by, an insane rich person. And I love that the dramatic tanker cue in Hamlish's score is returned, but in a much slowed down and subdued fashion. And we see the plan going into action. Are they going to accept these new coordinates? We see one captain call down and start to give the new coordinates. So maybe it's starting to work. Will they both do it? They're running out of time. We see the missile hatch doors open. We still haven't seen the second one yet. Now we're about to see the second captain. But, is it enough time, too, as well? Because they have to shoot at about the same time. And if one submarine accepted it, but one rejected it, what would they do? They could lose an entire city. So a lot hinges on this, and it's split-second timing. Then we see the clock hand go right to 12. See the first missile launch, and then the second missile. Again, very difficult to make convincing, rockets as miniatures, especially from a water launch. I mean, the miniature work here is amazing. And then I've always adored the fact that we get this wonderful dramatic view of the rockets, and we see it on the globe, and we see them almost intersect. And then they just pass over, and we don't see the actual rockets again until they're actually coming down. So we're seeing it all play out on that silent globe map, which, again, really builds up the tension far more than if you were actually able to see the rockets in air. Now, of course, the actual nuclear explosions, like most in films, it is mixing in, some stock footage of actual explosions. So if you look very closely, it's a little grainier and stuff because it is, footage of the actual, bomb explosions mixed in. But, that happens in, most films of this era throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s when they would depict that. And I've always loved that As soon as they accomplish this, then the whole tanker just starts exploding, like as if on cue. It's like, oh, the submarines are gone, explode. And the explosions are quite close to the actors, which is always, it really sells the scene, but it's also definitely probably a bit toasty that day. And then the Captain and Bond just get into the tower of the sub, order everybody around, and they have their nice observation post. And I love that some of them are injured, but they're still having to jump at stations, so they even have to take the injured guys and put them at their usual stations because they have no time to get out. Another thing I've always wondered, on some of the shots, you still see some guys swimming around and like looking like they're trying to get back on the sub. So I'm like, did they just get, yeah, right here, these guys, like, did they just get left? There's a nice element of desperation because, of course, not only is the clock ticking to stop Stromberg, but they also have to get the hell out of here because, of course, the whole thing is going up and will completely explode at any moment. And the editing and the close quarters photography amplifies the tension of just firing the torpedo. Beautiful explosion of the whole front of the miniature going. You have to feel so terrible for not only Ken Adam but Derek Meddings, thinking of all of their beautiful work that has to be destroyed and blown to bits every time. But of course, Derek Meddings would actually, on things that he knew would have to explode, he would actually build explosive charges into some of those sets, which is what causes some of the explosions to be so dramatically impressive. Sometimes he would literally build the charges into the construction. And then this wonderfully somber but rising cue as the USS Wayne starts to come out and everything is collapsing just behind it. And we see that the tower start to come through the front of the destroyed hole in the bow. And then the rest of the Liparis starts to go beneath the waves, and then the whole thing starts to sink as the explosions continue to go off. Has this wonderful, majestic quality to it. And then we get the look back, and of course, it's a process shot. It's definitely a process shot, but it works as brief enough. But it's always amusing when you get a definite process shot that pops up like that, where you see the obvious background. I do like that we get to see the actual Liparis going under, and then this little, the little last bit of the steam, and then the last bit is the last little piece visible goes under the waves, and we see the name on the back as the last thing, and then that's it. So now the film essentially is over, and we get the final assault on Stromberg, which takes the place of the whole coda of Bond films that have been established and formalized in the last three Guy Hamilton directed films of, there always being a tag ending with the last henchman you forgot about. Well, now the tag ending of the film is going after the villain. They've destroyed the Liparis. They've destroyed the scheme. Now they have to stop Stromberg. And the order, of course, is to literally destroy Atlantis right now. And Bond realizes Anya's still on there, so he's got to go get her off. He really doesn't. He could leave her to her death, but he does have feelings for her. He does actually care for her. And, him going to this risk, and also he wants to, stop Stromberg himself. He wants to be the man who goes in and does it single, he wants that physical connection. He doesn't want Stromberg to get away, and he doesn't want Anya to be killed. So he gets the commander to countermand his orders, and Carter literally says, you're going to get me court-martialed, but I'll give you an hour. And so we get the package from Q Branch, which of course this was pure G Wiz technology for people in 77, but this is the wet bike, which was essentially the forerunner of the jet ski long before it was popular equipment. So we see Carter get this confused look, we get the close up of the handlebars, and then immediately cut to Bond on the jet bike looking so unbelievably cool in the military gear, even though it's Roger Moore on a wet bike trying not to get thrown off. But timed in with Hamlish's Bond theme, which again I still want to hear on a soundtrack release. Oh, it's one of the great moments of badassery in the entire Bond series. And he just simply drives back up into Atlantis and just walks in. The Bond theme cuts off. Stromberg watches him come in, and we see the paintings close. And then we hear the chilling voice come over the intercom. I've been expecting you. Again, if you're ever anywhere and you hear someone come over an intercom, I've been expecting you. It's like, just get out of there. So now we will finally see Bond have to deal with the shark pool elevator. And we get a nice little, almost jazzy riff on the score. Goodbye, Mr. Bond. We see the button press. We see the shark. Oh, Bond's had it. He's going to fall in there. But then nothing happens. The music builds. Stromberg turns. The doors open. Bond has his gun out. You did want me to drop in. We get the nice reveal of him completely straddling the edge of the elevator. So it's amazing, Bond's instincts there, but beautiful. Again, another nice twist reveal. We get the setup. We think Bond is going to be fed to the sharks, but no, he manages to literally turn the tables on Stromberg. So he's made it further than anybody else has. He's got Stromberg at his mercy, or so we think. But then we have a literal turning of the actual table because Bond is persuaded to sit down, and Stromberg has the long gun under the table. You can see the end of the gun tube poking out there. Bond is clued in just in enough time. But of course, on the set, if you look there very closely, that explosion actually did hurt Roger. He got a nice little burn on his backside, and he was actually, not able to work for quite a little bit of time because the charge was just a bit too close. So it's definitely not fun. Now, when Bond kills Stromberg, you notice he shoots him several times at point blank range. And it's almost like it feels a bit like maybe a little bit of overkill because he just shoots him again and again and again, and then he moves closer and he shoots him again, and then Stromberg collapses. So it's always interesting why that was staged in that way, why Bond shoots Stromberg multiple times. I don't know exactly why, but it is quite dark, and, right then Stromberg is essentially unarmed, although who knows what his control pad has there. So now Stromberg is out of the way, and the Walther has jammed, allowing Jaws to escape. And this is probably the second biggest jump scare, where Jaws comes out from behind Bond, jumps him, disarms him, and this leads us into the shark pool room. Again, I have to make mention of how amazing Cat Adams' set design is here. I mean, just the hallway there with the escape chamber is breathtaking. But then we get to the actual shark pool room, and we get to see its full width. We see these circular gantries here. Of course, the magnet's going to come into play in a second. But the way the lights are built into the walls, and then the big circular lights in the ceiling, it's just astonishing design. I feel like a broken record saying that, but it's just amazing what Ken Adam can do with little money or letting his imagination run wild. And by having the magnet here, this is the final joke and the whole, probably, the whole culmination of Jaws' steel teeth and the Bond Jaws back and forth and the Jaws being slightly on the dim-witted side, maybe just enough for Bond to be able to get the drop on him. And then the way that Roger plays that by doing the slight smile, and then the look of concern as he looks up to coax Jaws to look above him, with the right level of malice in the one-liners. Because again, Jaws is a menacing figure and he's killed, countless people throughout the film. And now Bond is going to, drop him to deal with his namesake. And the idea was, Jaws was supposed to, meet his maker here. And maybe it's a little bit unbelievable that he can take on a shark with his bare hands, but, it's just passable enough, and we do see him swim away and survive. And, he would be brought back in Moonraker, a la the way that Sheriff Pepper was brought back in The Man with the Golden Gun. And, of course, the character being named Jaws and killing a shark with his teeth and everything, obviously he was named Jaws as a riff on the success of Jaws, the film. But, one has to wonder, him killing a shark definitely was probably also not as well. And now Bond returns as the chivalrous St. George, rescuing the fair maiden after slaying the dragon. But there's a nice ticking clock atmosphere because, of course, Bond says, Stromberg's dead and so are we unless we get out of here. Because he knows he's already overshot his time limit and it's a matter of time before the first torpedoes strike. So once again, this brings up the notion that Bond could have just, said, all right, yeah, those are your orders. You got to blow it up. Sorry, Anya, you're going to die. Too bad, collateral damage. But no, he goes in, eliminates Stromberg himself, battles Jaws once more, and, again, rescues the fair maiden. So this is Bond in traditional St. George the Knight mode. And, again, helps to sell the fact that he has developed real feelings for Anya as she has for him and has rejected those now because of her whole, I like you, but now I have to kill you. Now, of course, this is real water rushing in, and if you look closely at Barbara Bach's face, she is really getting freaked out because there's all this rushing water, and Roger's having to get the door open. Of course, it's lucky that Bond finds the exact hallway with the escape chamber and is able to recall that. Now, I've always felt that one brief shot of the helicopter inside the pad, if you look at it too closely, you can see that it's a model. It's the one model shot that doesn't quite work, but thankfully it's very, very, blink and you miss it. Again, you can see she is pretty freaked out. And I love the fact that there's this wonderful little escape chamber, and it's, very plush with all these pillows and bedding and all this fine wine and looks like cognac and all this great stuff and controls, and it's tricked out like a fancy limousine, and it's his escape chamber. So of course Stromberg would have this super fancy, escape chamber that was like a jet airline or something. If you look at it, I've always felt the design of it looks like an Arabian sword or something, but with the guard is just the pod chamber, and the aerial is like the blade itself. And now we hear that iconic radar sound effect that appears in a number of Bond films and other films. You hear it in Dr. No and the decontamination chamber. And now Bond remarks, I misjudged Stromberg. Amanda Jenks dumping her at 52 can't be all bad. And of course, in the way that XXX left the microfilm on the dashboard of the van earlier on in Egypt, Bond has laid down his PPK and XXX has picked it up. So it's another reversal of what came before. And she actually goes to pull the trigger. But in one of the final twist reversals, we don't get the expected gunshot. We get the popping of the cork. XXX smiles just ever so slightly. And then Bond uses the condemned man request to get out of these wet things, which is the perfect way to disarm the scene. She breaks into a smile, and they embrace once more. But hey, Jaws is still with us. It's amazing how quickly everybody just latched onto this character, who again was supposed to be a one-off character. But you have a certain fondness for this guy, even though in Spy in this film, he's definitely very menacing. But again, I think it's that slight dim-wittedness that you just want him to succeed. He tries so hard. And again, in a nod perhaps to You Only Live Twice, we have the ending where Bond and Lady are in the final clinch, the embrace at sea, and they'll never find us becomes, of course, they're never going to know, and of course, they're right there. Which gives us the final iconic line of the film, the keeping the British end up, which is the right level of innuendo without going in too far. I love that she notices first, and they draw the sheets closely, of course. And every person is completely befuddled by what they see. And Bond has to keep his composure, keeping the British end up, sir. And they get this wonderful, jaunty sort of sailor's chorus version of the title song, which we'll see back into the Carly Simon version. But it's one of the first, in credit special versions. I think maybe that tradition got started on Man with the Golden Gun, where you had the specially recorded version with different lyrics for the end title. So Carly Simon's theme song returns, and this closes The Spy Who Loved Me, which became a wonderful, crowd-pleasing and critically accepted success, which put Bond back on the map as a film franchise and a global film phenomenon. It was massively successful and proved Cubby Broccoli's gamble really paid off in spades. It is still a remarkably satisfying film experience that, again, sort of doesn't really reinvent Bond, but gives him new energy and a new outlook as a film series to tackle the end of the 1970s and plunge on into the 1980s with Roger Moore on board. And I think that this film and Moonraker do really provide a lot of gas in the tank for the series to continue into the John Glenn 1980s era of films. And because this film and Moonraker were the most successful films since the heyday of the Connery era, and still inflation adjusted are two of the most successful films in the series, that made Bond a big thing in people's eyes again. And of course, the final credit indicates the next film Bond would return in For Your Eyes Only, which was to have been the next film in the series. But of course, Star Wars came out in 1977, and that meant that because Moonraker had not yet been adapted, that was the smartest choice to go with, because it was the one novel left with the science fiction theme they could play into. So of course, those plans were scrapped, and they went ahead into Moonraker, which, again, as I said much earlier, a lot of people say, Spy Who Loved Me basically is almost a You Only Live Twice remake, because it's the same plot structure and idea. But I think it's unfair to call it a You Only Live Twice remake. I think it's a rehashing of the plot structure and the idea. It's You Only Live Twice underwater. I get that. But it's not a remake. No, I think that's unfair. But in the same way, Moonraker literally redoes the Spy Who Loved Me formula. So where Spy took the idea and the structure of You Only Live Twice, and again, apparently this was completely unintentional and they only realized it after the fact, which I find hysterical, because it seems really obvious, and especially after all the trouble they had in the script development, this is what happened in the final product. But the next film, Moonraker, they literally went to the Spy Who Loved Me playbook. I mean, it's literally in so many different ways. It's like Spy Who Loved Me 2.0 or Spy Who Loved Me in Space, but with added humor, and it's a bit richer, and they shot it in France, so it has a different look and a different feel. So maybe it was an example of, okay, they had some success, and then they kind of went a little too far on the next film, and then as they said, the next film after that being For Your Eyes Only, where they came back around to that, it was the idea of coming back down to earth and being more grounded, being grittier, and getting back to a serious spy thriller tone. But it's interesting to look, that's already there in The Spy Who Loved Me, and I'd actually make the argument it's there in Moonraker, particularly in the first half. That's a part of Moonraker that definitely gets overlooked, which I will cover in the next commentary. But Spy is very grounded. It definitely does have moments where it has the From Russia with Love flavor. It has moments where it has a Goldfinger flavor. It has moments where it has a Live and Let Die flavor. So it's a really interesting reblending of elements of the Bond formula that, again, I think created a successful cocktail for the late 1970s to rediscover James Bond as a film franchise, as a character, and it was something that was very successful at re-engaging the late 1970s audience. That was the key goal of the film. They achieved it in spades, and again, a lot of the new personnel that came in on The Spy Who Loved Me stayed around for a while. Again, the primary person being John Glenn, who came in as editor and one of the second unit directors on Spy, stayed on, did the same on Moonraker, and then wound up being tapped to take over the director's chair, which he held for the entirety of the 1980s over 5 James Bond films. So A Spy is a really, I mean, it's one of the most important Bond films ever made, simply because it was the make or break Bond film. Most people, and again, Roger Moore included, say it's their favorite of the Moore era, and I think that's very understandable because it is the most, I think it is the most balanced of all of the elements of the Bond formula, and I think it's one moment where they hit this balance between the again, I always go back to this, but it's not just From Russia with Love and Goldfinger, but it's the Terrence Young and Guy Hamilton styles. So those two being the key films they directed. So it's A Spy Who Loved Me gets this balance between the dark, gritty spy story world and the lavish, larger-than-life, slight tinges of fantasy, globe-trotting world of Goldfinger. So I think it's that rare film that manages to pull that off and have a convincing romance and love story in the middle of it that is built up and torn down and rebuilt again over the course of the film. It feels believable, and of course, it's a relationship obviously doomed to failure because, of course, they are, as said in the film, working for competing rival companies. So that's, of course, at the end why you see the two helicopters fly off in different directions. It would have been great to see Anya Masova come back again in the series, and she was apparently supposed to have a cameo in A View to a Kill, but it just never happened, so we got the Paula Ivanova character instead. But I think The Spy is a film that people have great fondness for, but I don't feel it really gets studied as art and as a great film as it should be, as all the Bond films should be, because they have such a lasting impact and are still watched and adored to this day that, they definitely have staying power. And I wish Spy would get looked at more critically as a great film, because it really is. It's a perfect blending of the dark and light elements of a James Bond film. And it blends it together so well and does it with such aplomb that it feels effortless. And that's that quality that I think people pick up and enjoy on so much. But then because it's so effortless, it looks so easy, they think anybody can do it, and not anybody can do it. And really, in a lot of ways, we would not have this sort of reinvention to this degree of the Bond films until GoldenEye in 1995, of having to completely recapture the audience. You can make the argument the Timothy Dalton era was reinventing things a little bit, but it was still firmly in the 1980s era, and being the last two films John Glenn directed after his first three being, Roger Moore's final three Bond films. But GoldenEye, they had to do the same thing as Spy Who Loved Me. They had to recapture an audience after a 6-year gap after License to Kill and all the legal problems. So they had the same issue of it having to be a make or break film. They had to shoot the works. They had to reestablish Bond, except now there had been a gap of 6 years, whereas on Spy there was a gap of 3 years from 1974 to 1977. So it was twice the amount of time, and it was having to reestablish Bond not for the late 70s, but for the mid-1990s, and for generations coming to the films which had ostensibly maybe never even seen a Bond film by that point, or people who had been born during the gap, as I was. So really, in a lot of ways, we're coming to the point here in 2021 where we're going to need that sort of reinvention again to really recapture audience interest. And Bond has been very good about being able to do this, but it's long overdue to have that come around again, because there are so many different competitors in not just film, but all different formats. It's a different landscape, so we really need not a Spy Who Loved Me 2.0, but we need this level of commitment and reinvention and regeneration and capturing of not just audience box office share, but audience imagination and audience participation and audience excitement. We need the impact of A Spy Who Loved Me again in 2021. And that's why it's so important for the James Bond series to have films impact the way that The Spy Who Loved Me did, and everyone's commitment to the film and making it the best it could possibly be, and shooting the works, and Cubby Broccoli betting the farm on this film working is what makes it so special, and it is completely effortless. So that's why The Spy Who Loved Me is important, and I feel I have just barely scratched the surface, as I always do in these commentaries. I just run along with the film and try to do character analysis and scene analysis and talk some about the production. And again, just trying to squeeze all this into 2.5 hours. I can't possibly get all of it in. So if you've lasted this long, thank you so much for listening along with me. And these are just various thoughts that come into my head whenever I rewatch the films. And I've got so much James Bond information rattling around. Again, I could probably do 10 of these on one film and not even finish. So I thank you so much for listening along. This has been my commentary on The Spy Who Loved Me, and I will come back with the next commentary for Moonraker. Hopefully you will come back and listen to me prattle on about that, and I will continue on with these James Bond commentaries for the near future until I complete them. So Spy is a film that's near and dear to my heart, as they all are, but it really is a great film. It should be treated as such, and it's one of the most perfectly balanced films in the entire series, and that is why it is so many people's favorite film, which I find totally understandable. I think it hits all the right elements. It has all the right qualities, and it manages to do it effortlessly without anything feeling, too out of place or being too off-putting. And it's a hard thing to recapture, and I think that's something that definitely turns up in the next film on Moonraker, where they try to recapture the success of The Spy Who Loved Me, but even coming off Spy, they couldn't quite replicate that all over again, and trying to do a version 2 immediately thereafter. It's not quite as fully perfected as they achieved on Spy. And again, I think it's some qualities of a happy accident, but also every person in the cast and crew really putting it all on the line to make the film as good as they possibly could. And of course, one must again say that it's really the Cubby Broccoli's vision and giant risk taking on the film that cemented James Bond as something that would stay and last, and was no longer just a pop culture phenomenon, but a part of our shared collective human history. And Bond is not going anywhere, and James Bond will return and will always return, just as I, the motion picture analyst, will return in my next commentary for Moonraker. So once again, thank you so very much for listening. As always, I am humbly yours, the motion picture analyst,